audio on Chabad.org.
Chapter 10, the portion of Bo. In the previous portion, we learned about the first 7 of the 10 plagues. We had Dom, Tzvardeya, Kinim, Orev, Dever, Shchin, Borod. 7. If you want to know the translation, look in your Maxwell House Haggadah. And today we're about to learn the last of the 3 plagues. Arbe, Choshech, Makas Bechoros. Chapter 10, verse 1. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe, Bo el Paro, come to Pharaoh. Ki, because I hichbadeti es libo, I have hardened his heart, v'esleiv avodav, and the hearts of his servants, leman, in order that shisi, I might display and show Eiseisai Ele, my wonders and miracles, Bikirbe, within him. So as the world sees that that you come to Pharaoh in my name and he refuses, and plague after plague comes, the world sees, this is all broadcast instantly on the internet, on CNN, on Fox, the world sees that a superpower is shattered by God. And that sends a message that I, God, am the master of the universe. That's the gist of verse 1. Rashi, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Bo el Paro. God says to Pharaoh, come to Pharaoh, or go to Pharaoh, v'hasrei be, and warn him. And the commentaries on Rashi say, what does Rashi want? Because it doesn't say, come to Pharaoh and tell him. So it's understood by now that Moshe goes to Pharaoh to warn him. Shisi sumi, to set. She'osis oni, I will set, I will place. The Baal HaTurim here says, Bo el Paro. Sometimes it says Bo, good morning. Sometimes it says Lech. How do we determine what reason the Torah uses, or God uses Bo, come, and when he uses Lech? So the Baal HaTurim says, when he told him to go to Pharaoh's house, he says Bo. When he tells him to go to the river, he says Lech. Here in particular, the word Bo has a special message. The numerical value of the word Bo, Beis is 2, Aleph is 1, 2 and 1 is 3, is that Bo el Paro, there are 3 plagues to go. Bo has the numerical value of 3. The Baal HaTurim also says that Shisi can also be read without vowels. You think it's the word Shtei. 2. Because there are 2 plagues that he still needs to be warned about, in addition to the last plague, the plague of the firstborn, which he was already warned about in the very beginning. So these are some of the nuances between the lines in verse 1. Verse 2, Uleman, and in order that Tisaper you may relate, Biozne bincha, in the ears of your sons, Uven bincha, and your grandchildren, Eis asher salalti b'Mitzrayim, how I have mocked Egypt. Vs. 16, and my wonders, my signs, asher samti bom, that I have placed amongst them. This will be eternal. This story will be told forever. V'yadatem ki ani Hashem, and you will know once and for all that I am Hashem. Rashi, the grammar, the usage, the definition of the word, hisalalti, is sichakti, I have mocked. I created a mockery out of a superpower. Kameiki salalbi, halikasher isalil bohem. Various examples of the usage of that word, ha'omer b'mitzriyim. It doesn't denote action or deeds. Shimkein hayel elalti. So it means to mock. Verse 3, Moshe and Aaron came to Pharaoh, and they said to him, Ko Amar Hashem Elokei Ha'Ivrim, so says God, God of the Hebrews, God of the Jewish people, Ad Mosai Meyanto Leonos Miponai. How long will you refuse to be humbled before me? Shalach Ami, send forth my people, V'yabduni, and let them worship me. Let my people go so that they can serve me. Again, the word leonos, 3 Rashi, kitagome liskino, to be humbled. When he gives us oni, it comes from the word, good morning, poverty, poor. Me'antli es oni v'shofo miponai, how long will you refuse to be humbled before me, says God through Moshe to Pharaoh. Verse 4, ki, because if you refuse to send forth my people, tell you what's going to happen. Hineni mevi mochar, behold, I am about to bring mañana, tomorrow, arbe, a plague of locusts, bigvulecha, throughout your borders. V'chisa, 5, and the locust, the plague will cover es ein ha'aretz, the face of the earth, to such an extent, it will be impossible for anyone to see the earth. All they will see are locusts, like in the movies. The ochales yeser hapleita, and the locust will consume whatever vegetation is left. Hanisheres lochem, whatever might have escaped minabora, the hailstorm. The ochal, and they will consume as koloates, every tree-eating locusts, green locusts, hasemeach lachem, which grow minasoda, from the fields, the locusts will consume it all. Rashi, es ein ha'oretz, es mare ha'oretz, the sight of the earth. V'lo yuchal haraya, whoever looks will be unable lires, to see es ha'oretz, the earth. V'loshen ksora diber, this is an abbreviated expression. Verse 6, umolu votechan, they, the locusts, will fill your houses, your house, and the house of all your servants, and the house of all Egypt, asher, to such an extent that leiro avisecha, your forefathers have never seen such a plague of locusts. Your parents, your grandparents, from the day that they were on the face of the earth, adayom azet, to this day, this will be unprecedented severity. Vayifen, vayetze, miyimpare, and he turned and walked out from Pharaoh's presence, having delivered the warning for the next plague. So Pharaoh's servants turned to him. They had an emergency cabinet session, and they said, Ad Mosai, how long? Till when? This will be, good morning, for us as a stumbling block. You're killing me, Larry. Shalach eso anoshim, send already these people forth. V'yabdu, let them go worship es Hashem Elokehem, God their God. Haterem teda, don't you yet know ki ovdo Mitzroyim, that Egypt is lost? What are you doing, Pharaoh? You're very stubborn. We are dying. Let them go worship their God. What's the big deal? Rashi, Haterem teda, ha'ed lo yadata, do you not yet know ki ovdo Mitzroyim, that Egypt is destroyed? The Baal HaTurim here says, Ad Mosai yihye ze lonu l'mokesh. How long will this one be for us as a stumbling block? So the Baal HaTurim says that Zeh refers to Moshe Rabbeinu. Ki Zeh ho'ish Moshe, this guy Moshe. Zeh is Moshe. How long will Moshe be a stumbling block for us? You're no match for him. He comes up on top every time. You have to stop messing with him. 8. So Pharaoh, feeling the pressure from the people, the masses were demonstrating in the streets, and they were twittering all over. Vayushav es Moshe v'es Aaron. They had Moshe and Aaron recalled El Paro to Pharaoh. Vayemer aleim, and he said to them, okay, done. Lechu ibdu es Hashem Elokeichem. Go serve God your God. Mi v'mi ha'helchim. Mi v'mi should not be confused with the falafel place that used to be by that name. Mi v'mi ha'helchim. Tell me who exactly is going. Give me a list, and we'll see if we can issue exit visas. Temporary visas to go out for 3 days and serve God. I want you to supply a list with passport numbers, and we'll see what we can do. We'll run it through the computer. 8, Vayushav, Hushvayidei Shaliach. He sent a messenger to bring them back. Shesholchu Acherim. He sent others. Shesholchu Achareim. He sent a messenger after them. Veheshivum, and brought them back. El Paro. So Moshe said, you want to know who's going? We're all going. Every one of us are going. There's a beautiful Baal HaTurim here, actually, where the Baal HaTurim says, between the lines, Pharaoh said to Moshe, why are you so interested in going? Do you really think that you're going to enter into Israel? Let me tell you, I consult my astrologers very often. I'm very into my stargazers, my astrologers. So let me tell you, they told me that you're all going to die in the desert. The exception is Yoshua ben Nun and Kolev ben Yefuna. Mi v'mi ha'ilchim have the numerical value, said the Baal HaTurim, of Kolev u'ben Nun. So Moshe said to him, as we'll learn, Binoreinu biskeinenu leilech, with our youth and our old folks we will go. Maybe the decree will be passed against those between the age of 20 and 60, but not under 20 and not over 60. And that's an interesting between-the-lines conversation that Pharaoh and Moshe had based upon Moshe's prophetic knowledge and Pharaoh's stargazer knowledge. Back to the text. Vayomer Moshe, and Moshe declares in this famous sentence, which the Rebbe has repeated in his talks about the future redemption, I would say hundreds of times, possibly thousands of times. Binoreinu ubiskeinenu nelech. We will go with our youth, and we will go with our old folks. We will go with the pediatrics and the geriatrics. Bivonenu ubivneseinu, with our sons and with our daughters, male and female. Not only that, we'll take everything we have, stocks, bonds, and securities. Bitzeinenu, with our sheep, uvivkorenu, and our cattle, nelech, ki, because Chag Hashem Lonu, this is a festival to God for us, and when we go, we take no chances, we take everything. You know, when we go on vacation, you take 98 suitcases, in case it rains, in case it doesn't rain, in case maybe it rains. Okay. Verse 10. Vayomer Aleim, so Pharaoh says to them, facetiously, Yehi Hashem imochem, may God be with you, kasher ashalacheschem v'estapchem, like I'm about to send you and your children. Are you kidding? I have to keep somebody hostage. It ain't happening. Re'u, why can't you see? Ki ro neget pneichem. There's evil stuff waiting for you. It's bad stuff out there for you. I'm your friend. I care for you. I don't think you should go. Verse 10, Kasher ashalach eschem v'yastapchem ap ki ashalach gam esatzei v'saboka kasher amartem. Are you kidding? Even if I will agree to send your cattle and your sheep, but your kids? No. Re'u ki ro neget pneichem ki targumei, as the Targum says, that evil is about to get you. Rashi says, I heard an interesting Agadic interpretation, famous interpretation, against Pharaoh with his astrologers. Kolchav echad yesh. There is a star, said Pharaoh to Moshe. Let me teach you a couple things. There's a star, sheshmei Ra, which is called the Ra. Ra means evil. That's the name of the star. It's the evil star. Re'ani b'tztagninus sheli. I see through my astrological charts, I see Eisei Kechav, that star, Eile likraschem bamidbar, is coming out to greet you in the desert. You don't want the evil star to greet you, believe me. Why? What's so terrible about the evil star? Because it's a star saturated with blood. V'husim dom, it's a sign of blood. You know, the mud and the blood and the beer. V'harigo, and killing. In fact, we see later that when the Jewish people sinned and constructed the golden calf, and God says, I'm going to kill all the Jewish people, So Moshe used that as negotiating ammunition. Omar Moshe b'tfiloso, Moshe said in his prayers, Lama yemru Mitzrayim lemer. Why should Egypt say, Bera'o hetziim? He took them out with evil intention, or he took them out to the evil star. Or, as we say, that Moshe said to Hashem, it's a shanda for the neighbors. Zuisha Omar Lohem, this is what he said to them, Re'u kiro neged pneichem. Miyad, immediately when Hashem heard Moshe's argument, by Yinochem Hashem alaro, God repented, changed his mind, and did not bring the evil. But the fact is that astrologers are also right. You know, the astrologers have to make a living too. So what did they mean when they saw blood? If they say they see blood, they see blood. The problem with stuff like astrology is it's vague. V'hofach es hadom, the blood that the astrologers saw, the blood of that star was transformed to a good blood. L'dam mila, to the blood of circumcision. Like the kid says, I'm bleeding here and everybody's eating lox and bagels. The blood of circumcision is a mazel tov. V'zeu shenemar, this is the verse in Yoshua where it says, Hayom galesi es cherpas Mitzrayim me'aleichem. Today I removed the shame of Egypt. Because the Egyptians always said, I see blood in the desert. We see blood. This was the blood of circumcision. It was a mazel tov blood. As we say by a bris, that you live with this blood. It's a blood of life. Blood, yes, but this was good blood. It was not the Crips and the Bloods. Verse 11, Loichein, not so, says Pharaoh. Bad idea. I have a better suggestion, says Pharaoh. L'chuno hagvorim, let the adults go. V'ivdu es Hashem, and serve God. You leave the kids behind. In the former Soviet Union, the philosophy was, if the old men want to come to synagogue, fine. We don't want to catch kids learning Judaism. Let the old people go serve God. V'yivdu es Hashem, and serve God. Ki eisa atem b'vakshim. Isn't that what you're looking for? You're looking for people to bring sacrifices. Kids don't bring sacrifices. They can cut themselves. V'yugoresh eisam, and they were driven away, me'es pnei Pharaoh, from Pharaoh's presence. Rashi loichein kasher amartem, not as you've said, lohei lechatach b'mochem, to take the children with you. I will not permit this. Ela lechu agvorim, let the adults go, v'yivdu es Hashem, and serve God. Ki yoisa atem b'vakshim, ki yoisa bikashtem adheina, for that's what you've been asking till now. Nizbecho le'lekeinu, let us offer sacrifices. V'ein derech hataf l'zbeach, children don't bring sacrifices. This is one of those abbreviated verses. It doesn't say who evicted them from Pharaoh's presence. Who is obviously the bouncer, the guy who always evicts people. The Balaturim says here, verse 10, Ro'o neged pneichem. Look at the last letter of each of those three words. Hadom, the blood. This symbolizes the blood that was awaiting them. End of today's Chumash portion.
Jewish audio on Chabad.org.
Good morning. The Chumash portion for today, Monday, of the portion of Bo, chapter 10, verse 12. Welcome. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. So we learned that the negotiations broke down. Moshe wanted every man, woman, and child to go worship God. Pharaoh was only agreeable that the adults should go. So the negotiations fall apart. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Now God says to Moshe, Netei yodcha, stretch forth your hand, al eretz Mitzrayim, over the entire land of Egypt, bo'arbe, for the plague of locusts, v'yal, so that it may come up over al eretz Mitzrayim, the entire land of Egypt, v'yochal, and let it consume, es kol esev ha'oretz, all the herbs, all the herbage of the land. Eis kol asher hishir haborot, anything that the hail left over. Rashi bo arba bishvil makas, so arba for the plague of locusts. 13, Vayet Moshe es Mateo, and Moshe stretched forth his hand, al eretz Mitzrayim, over the land of Egypt. Vahashem, and Hashem, God Almighty, nihag, led or brought, ruach kodim, an east wind, ba'oretz, upon the land, kol hayomahu, all that day, v'chol halayla, and all night. Haboker hoya, when morning came, v'ruach hakodim, and this eastern wind, Nosa, brought and carried, Eso Arbe, the locusts. Rashi, V'ruach HaKodim, Ruach Mizrachi, an eastern wind, Nosa, brought, carried, Eso Arbe, the locusts. Lefisha Bo, Kenegdo, because it came in the direction opposite Egypt. Shemitzrayim B'dreimis Marobis Hoya. Egypt was in the southwest, Kamev Shemaferish B'Makamachar, as he explains elsewhere, the location of the sea and the location of Egypt. So this required an east wind. 14, Vayal ha'arbe, and the locusts ascended, al kol eretz Mitzrayim, over the entire land of Egypt. Vayonach bechel gvul Mitzrayim, and rested over the entire border of Egypt, throughout Egypt. Koved ma'od, this was a very heavy plague. Lefonov lo'hoyachein arba kamo, and never before that time was there a plague of locusts that severe. The achrov, and never after that, and after that lo'yiachein will there be anything like that. This would be of overwhelming proportion. Here, Rashi comments that we know that there is a section in the Tanakh, in the book of Yoel, chapter 2, that talks about a terrible plague in the times of the prophet Yoel. V'achrav lo'yiakein, and here we say that afterwards no plague as severe will ever happen. V'eisa shahaya b'mei Yoel. What about the one described in the days of the prophet Yoel? Shenamar, as it says, kameyu le'niya min ha'elam. Never before was there one as severe. This seems to connotate that the plague in the times of Yoel was more severe than this. This would be contradictory. So this teaches us that this was supposedly more severe than Moshe's plague, so it's a contradiction. So he answers, the plague in the time of Yoel, the prophet, was a plague of many different species of locusts. They were together, arbe, yelek, chosel, gozam. He translates here as locusts, cankerworm, caterpillars, palmer worms. Aval shel Moshe, but the plague in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, loy hoya elamin echad, was one species, and a plague of one species will never again have that severity. V'chameyu loy hoya v'loyia, never was, and there never will be a plague of that severity, and he is telling us that that is one species, but in the times of Yoel, the plague consisted of many species. The Baal HaTurim brings down, interestingly enough, we learned earlier that every plague lasted a week. This particular plague, he uses the word Vayonach. There are only two places in the Torah that he uses the word Vayonach. One is here, and one is Vayonach Bayom HaShvi, in the verse of the Kiddush, that God rested on the seventh day. This teaches us that the locusts took the Shabbos off. They didn't work on Shabbos. That's what the Baal HaTurim teaches us. 15, back to the text. Vayechasen, they covered as ein kol ha'oretz, the face of the entire land. Vatech shach ha'oretz, literally, the land became dark. Vayechal, and they consumed es kol esev ha'oretz, all the herbage of the earth, of the land, ve'es kol prio eitz, and all the fruits of the trees. Asher haisir haborad, whatever the hail permitted to survive, whatever survived the hail. V'lei nesar kol yereg bo'etz ve'esev asoda. There was nothing green left in any tree or any herbage in the field. Bechol Eretz Mitzrayim, throughout the entire land of Egypt. 15 Rashi, Kol Yerek, Ola Yerek, green leafage, verdure in Old French, like verdi green. 16, Vayimahar Pare, and Pharaoh hastened Likre to summon Lamoshe Ula Aaron, Moshe and Aaron. Vayomer, and Pharaoh said, Chotosi, I have sinned. La Hashem Elokechem, to God your God, Velochem, and to you, I confess, I have sinned. V'ato, now 17, Sono, please I beg you, forgive Chatosi, my sin. Achapam, this last time, V'ha'atiru, and pray to entreat La Hashem Elokechem, God your God, V'yoser me'alai, that he remove from me Rak es hamoves hazeh, this plague of death. 18, Vayetze miyim parei, he left Pharaoh's presence, Vayeter al Hashem, and he prayed to Hashem, because Pharaoh agreed to follow God. 19, Vayapech Hashem, and Hashem transformed the wind, which was an eastern wind, to Ruach Yom, Chozak Ma'ed, bringing a very strong, this time, western wind. Vayiso Asa'arba carrying the locusts, Vayiskoeyu, and drove them and dropped them in Yom Asuf, into the Yam Suf, into the Red Sea. Shehu Peinel Etzad Mizrach, which turns towards the east. Shenemar, as it says, Miyam Suf Yad Yam Plishtim, from the Red Sea till the Sea of the Philistines, Mi Mizrach Lamaida, from east to west. Sheyam Plishtim, because the Sea of the Philistines, B'maida of Hoya, was in the west. Shenemar B'Plishtim, Yeshvei Chevel Hayom, the inhabitants of the seacoast, Goy Kresim, the nation of the Kresim, which presumably the Sea of the Philistines is the Mediterranean, and presumably the Yam Suf is possibly the Red Sea. Many of your Chomoshim, I'm sure, have maps. You can check the map. Even the locusts, which they salted and preserved and put in jars, even they were removed by this powerful western wind. 20, Vayachazek Hashem Eslev Pari, and God hardened the heart of Pharaoh, V'leishilach as Bnei Israel, and did not send forth the children of Israel. He changed his mind. So that's plague number 8. Segueing now to plague number 9, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, God said to Moshe, Nitei yodcha, stretch forth your hand, al hashamayim, over the heavens. Vihi choshech, let darkness prevail, al eretz Mitzrayim, over the entire land of Egypt. Biyomesh choshech, it should be so dark that people should feel the darkness, touch the darkness. Rashi 21, V'yomesh choshech v'yachshech aleim choshech, let the darkness make it darker, yeser mechoshker shalayla, darker than a dark night. V'cheshech shalayla yamish v'yachshech eid, and then the night of the days of darkness should be even darker than the days. V'yomesh, the word is kimei v'yomesh, with an aleph. Yesh lanu tevis harbe chasedes aleph. There are many words that are written without the aleph, but they connotate the word with the aleph. Vishein haboros aleph nichas kolkach. Why would there be words that would just leave out the aleph? Because the aleph is not pronounced. Ein hakosav makbed al chesreina. Very often the verse is not meticulous and allows it to be left out. Kigain v'layahil shom arovi k'mei layahil layita ole. V'chein vatazreini choyel is like vatazreini. Unklis tirgum loshen hasara, removal. K'mei layomish. Bosa diavdik ve'leila, after darkness of night will pass. Shagia samach le'rayim, when the time of day approaches. Aval ein hadibur miyushav al havov shaviyomish chesha. But this unklis interpretation doesn't make sense of the vav of the word viyomish. Levishu kosav achavi choshech, being that it's written after that there may be darkness, so there was already that expression. Medrash Haggadah Pesach, there's a medrashic interpretation that says lashon memashish batzarayim, like groping at noon. Shukafel mechupa va'av, it was a double and redoubled darkness at shahaya be'mamish, where you can feel the darkness. 22. Vayet Moshe, Yodei Moshe extended his hand, al hashamayim, over the heavens. Vayihi, and there came to pass choshech hafela, a thick darkness. Bechol eretz Mitzrayim, throughout the entire land of Egypt, for shloshes yomim, for 3 days. Rashi 22, Vayihi choshech hafela shloshes yomim. Rashi, choshech shel ofel, a darkness of thickness. How dark was it? How thick was the darkness? Sheleiro ish esachiv, no man saw another. Eisan gimel yomim, for the first 3 days. And then it says a plague of darkness. And then it says 3 days. This teaches us that ve'od shleishes yomim acherim, there were another 3 days. Cheshech mechupal al zeh, a double darkness over the first 3 days. How dark was it? Sheleikomu ish mitachtav, no man could rise up. Yoshev, if somebody was sitting during that second 3 days, and Yochalam, and he couldn't stand up. Ve'omer, if he was standing, and Yochalesh, he couldn't sit down. Ve'loma hevi aleim choshech. Why darkness? Why did God choose this as the 9th plague? Shahayu b'Yisrael be'esei hader, in that generation, there were amongst the Jewish people, Rishoyim, wicked people. There were Jews, v'loi hayeretzim lotzes, who had no interest in leaving Egypt. How would it look to the Egyptians if you had a population of Jews who refused to leave? Therefore, Hashem engineered it that umesu b'shleishes yemei afela, they perished, they died in the 3 days of darkness. Kidei, in order, shalayiru mitzriyim, the Egyptians should not see b'mapalosam, as they fall, v'yomru, and they should say, af heim leikim kameinu, look, the Jews are being smitten like we are. So therefore, Hashem removed all of these Jews who refused to leave. He had them die, and they buried them, and they did away with them in the 3 days of darkness. That's one reason. Another reason why darkness, another reason, Shechipsu Yisrael, because the Jewish people searched, Vero es kleim, and saw the Egyptian vessels, because when the Egyptians suffered darkness, it was broad daylight to the Jews. So the Jews roamed freely throughout the Egyptians' houses and condominiums and safes. And when they came forth, and the Jews, following God's instruction, asked the Egyptians for vessels of silver, vessels of gold, and designer garments, as we'll learn. And the Egyptians said, Ein biyodenu klum, we would love to give you our good neighbors, but we don't have. The Jew responds to him, he says, what do you mean you don't have? I saw it in your house. Who I can tell you it's in this place. It's on the 3rd floor of your mansion, the 2nd bedroom, the 3rd drawer in the back, under the pajamas. So everyone knew exactly where the Egyptians kept their treasures, so they could not say no to the Jewish people. Rashi, Shleishas Yomim, 3 days. Shiloh Shel Yomim, it means a triad of days, 3 consecutive days. Terazin in Old French, V'chein Shivas Yomim B'chol Mokim. Steiner Shel Yomim, every time the verse says Shivas Yomim, it means a set of 7 days. 23, Leira'u Ish Esachiv. During that period of time, no man saw his brother, V'leikamu Ish Mitachtav, and no man rose up from under him, Shloshes Yomim, for 3 days. Ulachol B'nei Yisrael, but as far as all the children of Israel were concerned, Haya Eir B'meshveisam, there was light in their dwellings. End of Chumash portion.
Jewish audio on Chabad.org.
Welcome, good morning. Today's Chumash portion, the Tuesday portion of the portion of Bo, chapter 10, verse 24. We learned in Monday's portion, yesterday's portion, about the intense, severe plague of darkness. Vayikra Pharaoh Moshe. So Pharaoh calls out to Moshe, Vayomer, and he says, Lechu ivdu es Hashem. Go and serve God. Rak. However, only tzeinchem uvkarchem yutzog. leave your sheep here, leave your cattle here, but I'm relenting. I've changed my mind about the children. Gam tapchem yelech imochem. I'm blessing you that you can also take the children with you. Just leave the cattle and sheep. Leave your possessions here. 24. Yutzag yehe mutzag b'mkeimei. Remain in its place. 25. Vayomer Moshe. So Moshe says, by the time I'm done with you, by the time this is over, gam ato titin biodenu, you will also as well be giving into our hands zvachim v'oles, sacrifices and burnt offering of your animals. Not only will you permit us to take our animals, you're going to be giving us your animals. V'yasinu, so that we can make and offer them la Hashem Elokeinu, to Hashem your God. Basically, the answer is no, we don't agree to your compromise. We need to take our sheep, we need to take our cattle with us, and by the time we're done with you, you will give us your sheep as well. 25, Rashi, Gam ato titin lo dayecha. It's not enough. Shemiknenu yedechimanu, that our cattle will go with us. Elagam mishochot titin, you're going to give your own as well. Verse 26, V'gam miknenu yedechimanu, our cattle as well. Not only will you give us cattle, but our cattle as well will go with us. Lo yisi shoyer parsa, a famous phrase. Not one hoof will be left behind, ki, because mimenu nikach, from it we shall take. Lave, to serve as Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem our God. So we need to take every one of our animals. V'anachnu le'neda, and we do not know ma navid as Hashem, exactly what we need. We don't have our list to know exactly what we need to serve God. Ad bayenu shama, until we come there, so we better bring it all. Rashi 26. Parsas regel, a hoof of a foot. Plante in Old French. Lo neda man aved, kama tichbad ho aveda, how heavy this service will be. Shema yishul yestem imashi yesh be'odenu, perhaps he'll ask more than that which we have in our possession. So, I guess we have another impasse here. Pharaoh agreed to let them go, taking their cattle and sheep. Taking their children, leaving their cattle and sheep. Moshe says we need every piece of cattle and every sheep. 27, Vayechazik Hashem, and Hashem hardened as slave Paro the heart of Pharaoh, V'lei ovo l'shalcham, and he refused to send them forth. 28, Vayomer lo Pharaoh, so Pharaoh got fed up, and Pharaoh said to him, Leich me'alai, you're out of here, get out, depart from my presence. Hisho melecha, watch out, be very careful. Al teisiv reis pona, you shall never see my face again. Ki, because b'yem reis chafonai, the day you will see my face, tomus, you shall die. So Pharaoh said, I've had it, and no go. 29, Vayomer Moshe, so Moshe said, Kain dibarta, you have spoken well. Like Eisif eid re'eis ponecha, I will not again see your face. I will not seek you out anymore. 29, Kain dibarta, Yofe dibarta, you spoke well. Ubizmane dibarta, you spoke timely. Emes, it's true, that I shall no longer see your face. Chapter 11, verse 1. The problem is that Moshe had not yet warned Pharaoh about the 10th plague. In general terms he did, but not specifically. So now, before Moshe departs from Pharaoh, Moshe said, but before I go, I've got something to tell you. Yomer Hashem Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe while he was there in Pharaoh's presence, Od nega echad, one more plague, Ovi, I will bring al pari upon Pharaoh, v'yamitzrayim, and upon Egypt, achre kain. After that, yeshalach eschem mizeh, he will let you go from here. And let me tell you, kishalche, when he does let you go, Kolo goresh yigoresh eschem mizeh. He will not only let you go, he will throw you out. He will push you out. He'll drive you to the airport. Kolo gemira entirely. Kolil totally. Kulchem yishalech, all of you. Two, and therefore, before you leave, we need to take care of something. Taking care of business. Daber no, please, I beg of you, speak. Biosnei into the ears of the people. V'yish'alu, let them ask, request. Ish meyesreyu, every man from his fellow man. V'isha meyesru, so every woman from her fellow woman. They should ask the Egyptians for klei chesev uchlei zohav, vessels, jewelry, vessels of silver and of gold. Vayitein Hashem eschein ha'om, and Hashem gave the grace, the favor of the people, be'enei Mitzrayim, in the eyes of the Egyptians. And the people actually gave them vessels of silver and vessels of gold, and as we learn, designer garments. Gam ha'ish Moshe, even the man Moshe, Godol mi'od b'eretz Mitzrayim, became very great and very popular in the land of Egypt. He was the Time magazine of the man of the year. Be'enei avdei Pharaoh, in the eyes of Pharaoh's servants, be'enei ha'am, and in the eyes of the people. Moshe became the number one popular guy in Egypt. The Balaturim here says that Gam Ho'ish Moshe, backwards, the last letter of those three words backwards, makes up the word Hashem. Gam is a mem, Ho'ish is a shin, Moshe is a hey. So these three words, the last letter of the word backwards is Hashem. That not only Moshe became popular, but God became popular. And suddenly all of Egypt was also talking God. Okay, end of Chumash portion.
Jewish audio on Chabad.org.
The portion for Wednesday of Parshat Bo, chapter 11, verse 4. Vayomer Moshe, and Moshe said, Ko Omar Hashem, so says God. Moshe is speaking to Pharaoh after Pharaoh threw him out. Kachatzeis halaylo, at approximately midnight, ani yetze b'seich Mitzrayim, I will go forth in the midst of Egypt. Vayomer Moshe, ko amar Hashem, and Moshe said, so says God, bi'omdei lifnei parei nemra le nevuazu. As we learned earlier, this prophecy was stated to him while he was still standing before Pharaoh. Sharei mishiyotza milfonav, because once he left, he no longer saw him. So actually, God appeared to Moshe as he was standing in Pharaoh's chambers. When the night is divided, when it ascends, this is the simple meaning. She'ein chatzei shem dover shel chatzi. Chatzos is not the noun of chatzi, but it means when the night is divided. Rabbi Seinu Droshu, and our rabbis interpreted this, Kimei kachatzi alayla, at about midnight. V'yomru, and they said, She'omar Moshe kachatzeis, Moshe said about midnight, Shemashma, which suggests and implies somuch loy, nearby, Eilafon, of either ahead, Eila'achrav, or behind. V'layomar b'chatzeis, he didn't say exactly midnight. Why? Because if Moshe will declare at exactly midnight, Shema yitu itstagnine pare, perhaps Pharaoh's astrologers will make a mistake. And they'll say, Moshe badoihu, Moshe lied. Because it's now 12:01, and nobody died. V'yemru Moshe badoihu, aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu bar Hashem, Yedeya ito v'rugov, who knows the exact moment. Omar bachatzos, he said exactly midnight. Verse 5, Umeis kol b'cher b'eretz Mitzrayim, every firstborn in the land of Egypt will die. Mi b'cher pare, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, hayeshiv al kisei, who sits upon his throne, ad, until b'cher hashivcha, the firstborn maidservant, asher achar harechayim, who is behind the millstones, b'cher behema, as well as every firstborn of the cattle. Rashi 5, ad b'cher ashvi, lama loko ashvuyin, why were the captives smitten? They were also captives. The answer is, number one, Kadesh Yemiru, in order that they not say, Yirosam Tovo El Beinam. It was their idol, their God, who demanded pay, restitution for their being insulted. V'hevia Poronius Al Mitzrayim. They'll take the credit that their God brought punishment. B'cher Parei at B'cher Ashivcha, Kol Habchusim B'cher Parei, anyone lower, V'chashuvim b'b'cher hashivcha, or higher than the maidservant hoyu b'chlal. V'lama loko b'nei hashvachas, why were the sons of the maidservant smitten? Sha'af heim hoyu mishabdim bohem usmeichem b'tzarosam, because the sons of the maidservants also enslaved the Jewish people, were also happy with their oppression and affliction. B'chil b'cher behemo, every firstborn animal, cattle, because the Egyptians worshipped them. When God punishes a nation, Nifra, he punishes Elit Me'elikel, he exacts punishment from its God. That is why the God of the sheep and the cattle were slain as part of the plague of the firstborn. There will come to pass, there will be a great outcry throughout the entire land of Egypt, Asher, to such an extent that Kamohu, that before that, there's never been anything like that, nor will there be anything like that. There'll be a massive, unprecedented, historical outcry. 7, but as to the children of Israel, not a dog will wet its tongue. Against man or animal. In order that you may know. Asher Yafle Hashem, that Hashem will distinguish and separate Bein Mitzrayim, between Egypt, Ubein Yisrael, and the Jewish people. 7, Rashi, Lo Yechratz Kelev L'Sheinei. Eimerani, I say, Shuloshin Shinun, it means wedding, Whetting. Lo Yeshanen, V'chein Lechoretz L'bnei Yisrael, L'Sheinei, Lo Shinen, did not wet. Os Techratz, Tishtane, sharpen, L'meidek Chorutz, Shonen, Machshves Chorutz, Odom Chorev V'shonim, a man whose thoughts are sharp, V'yad Choritzim Tasher, Charifim, Seichrin Shnunim. A dog will not wet its tongue. Asher Yafle, Yavdil, separate, divide. 8, V'yordu chol avodecha ela elai, and all of your servants will come down to me. V'ishtachavu li, and will bow to me, lemor, saying, Tzei, go forth, ato you, v'chol ha'am, and all the people, asher beraglecha, that are at your feet. V'achrechein, and only after that, Eitzei, will I go forth. V'yetzei mi impare b'choriyov, and he stormed out of Pharaoh's presence with anger. Rashi, V'yordu chal avodecha, your servants will come down, cholak koved la malchus. Moshe was paying respect to royalty. Sha'arei basot, because in the end we learn, Yorat pare ba'atzmei, Pharaoh himself went down looking for Moshe. He loved to him, balaylat night, vayem, and he said, Kumutsu mitechami, rise forth and go and leave my people. V'liyamalei Moshe mitchila. Moshe did not say, you will come down and bow to me, because Moshe, as we learned earlier, showed respect to royalty. We have to show respect even to evil royalty. Asher beraglecha ha'hilchem acharatzoscha v'yiluchecha. Those who follow your counsel and your ways, ve'achrechein eitzei im kol ha'om, with all the people aviatzecha from your land. V'yetzei mi imparik shegomer dvorav, when he finished his words, yotza milfonav, he departed, b'choriyov, in hot anger, al she'omar le, because he said to him, al teisef reis ponai, you will not see my face anymore. Verse 9, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and Hashem said to Moshe, Lo yishma aleichem paro, Pharaoh will not listen to you. Leman, in order that reveis meifsai be'eretz Mitzrayim, I will be able to multiply my miracles in the land of Egypt. 9, Leman reveis meifsai Rashi makas becheres, there is the plague of the firstborn upcoming, Ukriyas Yamsuf, then there's the splitting of the sea, where again Pharaoh changes his mind, pursues the Jewish people. Or the Nairas Mitzrayim, the whole idea of confounding Egypt in the sea. Of course, there is the famous teaching that the 4 words at the end of verse 9, Revos, Mofsai, Be'eretz Mitzrayim, multiply my wonders in the land of Egypt, is the acrostic of Rambam, Maimonides, Reish Mem Beis Mem, which stands for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. That these words, to multiply my wonders in the land of Egypt, represent Rambam, Maimonides, who lived in Egypt and who made wonders in Egypt as well. He was the Egyptian scholar of the Jewish people. So many years before Maimonides lived, the Torah alludes to his existence. And the portion of Bo is usually read not long after the day of passing of the Rambam. Verse 10, Moshe ve'Aaron osu es kol ha'meifsim o'ele, and Moshe and Aaron performed all of these wonders, lifnei Paro, before Pharaoh. Vayachazek Hashem, and God hardened the slave Paro, Pharaoh's heart, v'leishilach es b'nei Yisrael mi'artzei, and he did not send forth the children of Israel from his land. Moshe v'Aaron osu kvar kosav lonu zeis b'chol ha'meifsim. Already the Torah tells us this with all the miracles. V'leishno kan ela b'shvil l'samcha l'parsha shalachreho, and he learns it again here in order to join it to the next section, chapter 12, verse 1. We now come to a very important section in Torah. In the first verse of the Torah, where it talks about why it says Bereshis, Rashi brings down that the entire narrative of creation and the patriarchs and that whole story is only brought down in order to tell us that God created the world, gave the Holy Land temporarily to whom he chose, and then gave it to Israel. And the language there in Rashi is that the Torah should have begun from the portion here in chapter 12, verse 1 of Exodus, that deals with the first law. Because if the Torah is a book of law, then it should deal with law. Why stories? The answer is so we should know that it's God's world. This is this law which he referred to earlier, and now, although there will be more stories and more narratives, we segue into the section of law within the Torah. Here is the law of Rosh Chodesh, of Nisan, of the Paschal sacrifice, preparing for the Exodus from Egypt. Chapter 12, verse 1. Vayomer Hashem, God spoke, El Moshe, be El Aaron, to Moshe and Aaron, be Eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt, Lamar, saying. So this portion of Torah was given in the land of Egypt. Rashi, Vayomer Hashem El Moshe, be El Aaron, Bishvil Sha'aron Osa B'Torach, Bamofsim Kemoshe. Why is Aaron included into the Torah teaching? Moshe is the teacher, Moses the lawgiver. Because Aaron worked so hard with all the miracles and wonders, Cholak lekoved zeh, the Torah. Hashem gives Aaron this honor, b'mitzvah rishayin, in the first commandment, sheklola yemeshe badibur, where he incorporates him, Aaron, with Moshe in this commandment. Be Eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. As we learned earlier, there was a problem with Moshe speaking to God and God speaking to Moshe in Egypt because it was filled with idols, forbidden to pray or to reveal Torah. Therefore, he says, Chutz likrach, This must have taken place outside the city limits, where there were no idols. Perhaps it was in the city. Talmud Lamer, no. Earlier, when Moshe prayed every time, it says, as I depart the city limits, I will pray to God. If even a relatively simple prayer he didn't offer in the city limits because of the idolatry. Dibur Chomer, here, a heavy, serious teaching of Torah, like Hoshkan, surely would not be stated by God to Moshe and Aaron in the city limits. Rashi brings down the reason, because it was filled with idolatry. What does God say? Verse 2, this month, referring to the month of Nisan, is to you the beginning of all months. Rishon hu lachem, it is the first to you, l'chodshei hashana, of the months of the year. In the simplest term, first and foremost, he's giving the laws of Rosh Chodesh, that the Jewish people follow a lunar calendar, and when the new moon is born, that's when the month begins. Rashi, Achedesh Hazeh, Herohu, Hashem showed him, Levona, the moon, Bechidusha, at the moment of its rebirth, in a new moon. V'omar Layan said to him, Kisha hayoreach mischadesh, when the moon becomes new again, Yelecha Rosh Chodesh, there will be Rosh Chodesh. Ve'ein mikra yetze midei pshutai, nevertheless, the simple meaning prevails as well. Al Chedesh Nisan Omar Lei, that he's saying this to him regarding the month of Nisan. Zeh, this month, year will be Reish, the head, Leseder, for the order, minyan of the count, Hachadoshim, of the months. Sheyehei Iyar Korisheni, from now on, Iyar will be the second month, Sivan, Shlishi, Sivan will be the third month, and so on. Nisan becomes the first month. Symbolically speaking, up to now, Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah, was the first month. Nisan was the seventh month. But we're about to enter into a new era, and that is the era where the Jewish people become a people, and God makes miracles and takes them out of Egypt and gives them the Torah. We have to segue, we have to move from Tishrei, which represents the laws of nature, to Nisan, which represents miracles. Nisan comes from the word nes, miracle. The Jewish people are a miraculous nation, and therefore God says to the Jewish people on the first day of Nisan, from now on, your first month will be Nisan. You will be a miracle people, no longer limited by the laws of nature. That's from a deeper perspective. Hazeh, Rashi, Niskasha Meisha. Meisha was perplexed. Al-Meilad Halavon. At exactly what point do we say it's a new moon? Be'ez Shir Teirah. How big does the moon have to be? The new moon, V'tiyeru Yelakadosh. It should be able to be sanctified, because during the time of the Bet Din of the Sanhedrin, 2 witnesses would come and testify, we saw the moon. And the Bet Din would declare it Rosh Chodesh. How do we know what is considered a new moon? And he showed it to him with his finger, Salvon of the moon, Baraki in the heaven. And he said to him, Kozeh, when the moon is like this, Re'eh, you should see it, V'kadesh, and proclaim it. The Kate said, Hero, how did he show it to him? Generally, Hashem spoke to Moshe during the day. Generally, we don't see the moon during the day. Shenamar, as it says, Vayhi biyom dibar Hashem. It was the day that God spoke. Biyom tzavo, so the day He commanded. Menayem ashitziva Hashem b'hola, day. Ela samach l'shkias hachama nemrele parshazu. Very close to sunset, this portion was stated. Veher ohu, and He showed it to him. Im chashecha, as the dark was coming, it was twilight. So that's the time when it's still somewhat light outside, but the moon is visible. What was the command? Verse 3, Dabru, speak, Halakol Adas Yisrael, to the entire congregation of Israel, Lamar, saying, Be'oser l'chedesh hazeh, on the 10th day of this month, V'yikchu lohem ish, each one of you, each man shall take seh, a lamb, leves always for their father's house, seh, a lamb, laboyas, for each house. 3, Dabru el kol adas, v'chi Aaron medaber, should Aaron as well speak? Why is it plural? But like Vanemer Ata Shadaber, you, Moshe, should speak. Elachel can kobetz elazeh, they always gave respect to one another. They said to one another, Lamdeni, teach me. V'hadibur, and the statement, Yetze, would come forth, mibein shneim, from both of them, kilu shneim bedabrim, as if they were both speaking, so says the Mechilta. Dabru el kol adas Yisrael emer. Ve'oser lachedesh, dabru hayom, speak today on Rosh Chodesh, on the first day of Nisan, beRosh Chodesh, sheyikachu, that they should take this lamb, the sheep, be'oser lachedesh, on the 10th day of the month, so that the sheep sacrifice, the animal to be sacrificed in Egypt, was taken on the 10th day of Nisan. Hazeh, this Pesach Mitzrayim, the Paschal sacrifice of Egypt, Mikoche, was taken be'oser on the 10th day of Nisan, B'lei Pesach Deiros, unlike the permanent Paschal sacrifice year to year. Seleves Aves Lemishpacha Echas, for one family. Harei Shayim Merubim, in case they were many, Yachol Se'echad L'kulan, I would think one lamb would suffice for all of them. Talmud Lemer Sel Aboyas, a lamb for each household. Verse 4, what if the household is too small for an entire lamb because they have to consume the lamb? So he and his neighbor, the one close to his house, according to the number of people, each person by the amount he can eat, shall sign up on the sheep. So it was a sign-up process. The household or two households. If there are too few people for one lamb, they won't be able to consume the whole lamb. They'll have to leave over some. Leaving over was forbidden. He and his neighbor shall take. That's the simple meaning. There's a midrashic teaching, to teach us that once they signed up, they can exclude themselves still. They can withdraw and join up on another as long as the act hadn't yet taken place. If they're coming to withdraw, it should only be while it's a live lamb. While the lamb is still existing. While it is alive. Once it is slaughtered, it's too late. Michsas means cheshbon, number. Fit to eat. Prat, this excludes l'chela, a sick person who can't eat, or the zaken, or an old person who can't eat. Sheni yachol echel kazayas, who can't eat at least an olive size or more of this sacrifice, should not be part of the sign-up process. Tachesu tismanun shall count. What are the specs, the specifics? 5 satomim. A lamb without blemish, zochar, male, ben shana, of the first year, yilachem shall be to you, minakvosim, uminoizim, whether it's a sheep or goat, tikochu, you shall take it. Rashi, Tomim, Belemum, without blemish, Ben Shana Kol Shnosei, Kori Ben Shana, the entire first year, Klei Mishanel B'Shana Zu, born this year, Min Akvosim, Umino Izim, a Mizeh, either or, Sha'af Eis, Kori Seh, even a goat is called a Seh, Shenemar V'Sei Izim. 6, V'Hoyolachem, it shall be to you, L'Mishmeres, as a keeping or keepsake, Ad Arba Soyim, for 4 days, until the 14th of Nisan, L'Chodesh Hazeh, V'Shachtu Eisei, and then you shall slaughter it. Who shall slaughter it? Keil, Kahal, Adas Yisrael, the entire assembly of the congregation of Israel, Bein Arboim, towards dusk. Rashi, V'hoyo lechem lemishmeres, Zeo loshen bikur, this means examining. Sheton bikur, it needs to be examined. Mimum, to make sure there's no blemish. Arba yom, for 4 days, Keidem shchita, before the slaughtering. Now the question is, famous Rashi, why did the Jewish people have to take this lamb before slaughtering it, Arba Yomim, and hold on to it for 4 days? This law does not apply to the Paschal sacrifice of future generations. Hoya Reb Masya ben Cheresh Omer, Reb Masya, son of Cheresh, taught, this is the reason to give the Jewish people merit of mitzvahs, because they were barren, naked. They had no mitzvahs. They needed to acquire merit so that the blessing can sit on this merit. As he says in Ezekiel, Hashem says through the prophet Yecheskel, reminiscing back towards Egypt, when I passed over you, and I saw you, on the one hand, the time came, Eis Deidim, the time of love. What is the time of love? The time of redemption. Higia Shvur, the time has come to fulfill the oath, Shenishbati, which I swore, Li'Avram, to Abraham, She'egal Azbanav, that I will redeem his children. But they had no mitzvahs in their hands to occupy themselves with, to acquire merit, Kadeshi Yigalu, in order that they be redeemed. Shenemar, as it says, you were naked and bare of mitzvahs. Therefore we read that V'nosan lahem, that Hashem gave them shtei mitzvahs, two general mitzvahs. One positive mitzvah, one, so to speak, in the category symbolically of a negative mitzvah. Dam, Pesach, the blood of the Paschal offering, which represents the fact that we are withdrawing ourselves from idol worship, making a public declaration against idol worship. V'dam Mila, then the blood of circumcision, Shemot b'is halayla, because they also circumcised themselves and their families that night. Shenamar, as it says, Misbeiseses b'damayach. I looked down and I saw you wallowing in bloods, plural, b'shnei damim, two bloods, the blood of circumcision and the blood of the Paschal sacrifice. V'amen, and it says in Zechariah, Gam at b'dam brisech shilachti asirayach miber ein mayim. As for you, with the blood of your covenant I sent forth your prisoners out of the pit which has no water. So this teaches us that circumcision took place that night as well. Well, if he show you shtufim bo'alilim, being that the Jewish people were steeped in idol worship, it says that the Jewish people fell to such a low spiritual level that they began worshiping idols in Egypt. Omar lohem, he's told them this mitzvah, mishchu, withdraw, make a declaration that idol worship is over, it's finished, you're no longer going to be worshiping idols. Ukhu lochem, and then take for you this animal which was worshipped by the Egyptians and perhaps by some Jews. Mishchu yedechem me'alilim, remove, withdraw your hands from idol worship. Ukhu lochem tzein shal mitzvah, and take the sheep of a mitzvah. V'shachatu eisei, and slaughter it. V'chikulan sheichtim, did everybody slaughter it? This is one of the sources in which we learn that a man's emissary, a man's shliach, is considered himself. You send someone to slaughter it, it's like you're slaughtering it. Kahal adas Yisrael, kohol ve'edav Yisrael. Three expressions of community here. Mikan Amr, from here we say, Pischei Tzibur, that the Paschal lambs of the community, Nishchos, are slaughtered b'sholosh kitas, in three groups, zuachazu, one after the other in the Beis Hamikdash. Nichnas hakat sheni, when the first group enters, Nina ludalsis ha'azara, the doors of the courtyard were closed, etc. Kedisa b'psachim, as it says in tractate Psachim. Beino arboyim, what does afternoon mean? Imagine the day starts at 6 a.m., then noon would be 12 p.m. Sheisha Sulamayla, from the 6th hour and on, Kori Beino arboyim is called noon. Shashem esneta, because the sun declines, leveis mevayed, towards the place of setting, lahare, for evening. Veloshin beino arbayim nira beinay eisen shas. Those hours shebein arivas hayim, which is between the evening of the day, l'arivas halayla, and the evening of the night, arivas hayim betchila zayin shas. The evening of the day is the beginning of the 7th hour. Miki yenotot sil le'erev. Arivas halayla betchilas halayla, and the evening of the night is the beginning of night. Erev loshin nefesh neshef v'cheshach k'mei orva kol simcha. Erev means darkness, evening. So that the Jewish people were given here two mitzvahs to prepare themselves to merit the redemption. One of the senior disciples of the Rebbe explained that we can perhaps say that this was and continues to be the Rebbe's intent in the mitzvah campaign to prepare the Jewish people to merit the future redemption through Mashiach, so that every Jew will have, at the very least, a few mitzvahs. 7, v'lokchu min adam, they will take from the blood, v'nosnu, and they shall place it. Al shtei hamezuzos, upon the two side posts, v'al hamashkef, and the lintel, which is the top. Al habotim, upon the houses, asher yechlo eser bohem, where they will consume and eat this Paschal sacrifice. 7, Zukabolas Adam, this means receiving the blood. Yachal bayad, they would think by hand. Tamalema asher basaf, in the basin. hamezuzes hemaskufes, the upright posts, achas mikan lepesach v'achas mikan, one on each side of the door. Hamashke for Elyon, the upper beam, shadal shekev olav, upon which the door strikes. Kishasei ganesa, when one closes it. Lintel in Old French, v'losha shkifa chabot, it means striking. Kamekol ola nidaf, tarfa de shokev, chabura mashkefi, striking. Al habotem asher yechloisa bohem, v'lo yal hamashkef u'mezuzis, not on the lintel and side posts. Shebebeis hateven, in straw houses where you store straw, or beis habakar, or barns, shein dorim b'secher, which are not dwelled in. 8, v'ochlu es haboser, they shall eat the flesh, v'layla hazeh, on this night, the night of the 14th, tzli eish, roasted with fire, umatzis, and unleavened bread. So here we see that the Jewish people were commanded to eat matzah even before the exodus of Egypt. Al mereirim, upon bitter herbs, yechlu, they shall eat it. So they actually were commanded to make a Pesach Seder the night before they left, the night crossing over from the 14th to the 15th of Nisan. 8, es haboser v'legidim atzomas, not the bones or the veins. Al mereirim kol esav nikra mora. Any bitter herb is called mora. But tzivim lechel mar, he told him to eat bitter zecher, to memorialize, reminiscent of ayemoru es chayim, the Egyptians embittered their lives. And now they're told 9, al teichlu mimenu no, do not eat from this sacrifice as it is in a state of raw. Ovoshel mevushel b'moyim, neither should you cook it in water. Kiim tzli eish, it must be roasted on fire. Reishay al krov, its head with its legs, val kirbei, with its inwards. Rashi al teichlu mimenu no, shein etzoli kol tzorkei, not roasted sufficiently. Korei no is called raw, b'lashon Arabi in Arabic. All this is included in that prohibition. How do we know you can't cook it in other liquids? In apple juice, Talmud Lamer, period. Only roasted. Earlier, there was a decree of a positive commandment. Here, there is a decree of a negative commandment added. Only roasted. Reishe al kroiv, tzeileya kula ka'echad, he roasted altogether. Im reishe with its head, im kroiv with its legs, im kirbay in the inwards of neimeyav and its intestines, neisen l'seiche, places within it, achad achosan, after first making sure to rinse off the intestines. V'loshen al kirbay, keloshen al tzivesam, kamei bitzivesam, with kamei shein as they are, abzeh kamei shu, kol psari mishulam, whole. Verse 10 relates to Siru Mimenu Ad Baker. You may not leave over any of this food until morning. Mimenu Ad Baker, that which is left over until morning. Bo'esh Tisreifu must be burned and consumed in fire. Rashi Mimenu Ad Baker Matabalemer Ad Baker Pamshniya. Why repeat the word Ad Baker? Litin Baker Al Baker, to give one morning to the other. Shah Baker Mishmoi Mishas HaNetzachama. The morning implies sunrise. Or Bo'akos of Lahagdim Shasa Bachilam Elesa Shacha, that already we should stop eating at dawn. Zel, if you put it, that's the simple meaning. Right? The Medrash says, Lima, this teaches us, that it should not be burned if it's left over on the holiday itself, but the intermediate day is the next day. That which is left over on the first morning, Ad Beker Sheni, hold it to the second morning. Tamid, you should hold it, and then burn it. 11, this is how you should eat. This, the Paschal sacrifice. Masnechem chagurim, your loins girded. Nalechem beraglechem, your shoes on your feet. Umakelchem beyetchem, your walking staff in your hand. V'achalta mesa, you shall eat it. B'chibosein, in haste. Pesachul Hashem, this is a Paschal offering to Hashem. Masnechem chagurim, mizumonim laderach, ready for the road. B'chibozin, loshen behalo miiros, hurriedness, haste. K'mei David nechbez l'lechas. David made haste to get away. Asher ishlichu aram b'chopsom, that which the Aramites threw away in their haste. Pesachul Hashem, hakorban kori Pesach. The sacrifice is called Pesach, skipping, jumping. Hashem adiluk, for the leaping over. V'apsichon, the passing over. Shagodesh baruch hu medalik. Because as we will learn, God skipped and jumped over Bate Yisrael, the houses of Israel. Mibain, which were between Bate, various houses, Mitzrayim of the Egyptians. The Kepetz, and he would jump, so to speak, Mitzri the Mitzri, from Egyptian to Egyptian. Yisrael Emtsoi Nimlat, even if there was a Jewish home between the two, and he was saved. V'atem, and you, Asudu, Kol Avedes, of all of the rites of this sacrifice, L'Shem Shemayim, for the sake of heaven. Derech Dilu Gukvitza, also skipping and leaping. Zecher, reminiscent l'shmei, for its name, Shekori, which is called Pesach. V'gam, Pishke Loshen Pshia, in Old French, it means stepping over. 12, Yavarti B'Eretz Mitzrayim, and I will pass over in the land of Egypt, Balayla Hazeh, on this night. V'Kesi, and I will smite Kopcher, every firstborn, B'Eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. May Odom V'Yad Behema, from man to beast, of Achol Elikei Mitzrayim, and against all gods of Egypt, Esa, I will execute Shvatim, judgments, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem. Rashi v'yavarti kimelech, like a king who passes mimakam l'makam, from place to place, u'ba'avora achas, and with one pass through, u'berega achad, in one moment, kulan lake, and they're all smitten. Kol b'cher b'yeretz Mitzrayim apachedes hachedim v'heim b'Mitzrayim, even firstborn of other countries, if they happen to be in Egypt. U'minayin apachedim Mitzrayim shebim k'emes hachedim. How do we know? Even firstborn of Egypt, which were out of town in other places. Talmud lemed l'makem Mitzrayim, that God smote Egypt bivchereim, with their firstborn, no matter where they were. The one who started the sin first begins with the punishment. That's why man comes before animal. The gods of Egypt shall eat, the wooden idols near Kevis would rot. Metal, nimses would melt, and be poured to the earth. I myself, not by means of a messenger. 13, V'haya Adam lachem, the blood shall be to you, la'es, as a sign, ala botim, upon the houses, asher atem sham, where you are. V'ra'isi es Adam, I will see the blood, u'pasachti aleichem, and I will pass over you, v'lo yevachem negev, there will be no plague, lemashkas, to destroy you, ba'akesi, as I smite B'eretz Mitzrayim, the land of Egypt. 13, Rashi, V'haya Adam lachem, la'es, to you, for a sign. But not for others. The blood did not have to be put externally in the houses, outside the houses, but it was inside the house. How is God going to see it inside the house? How is God going to see it inside the house? Only God needed to see it. Everything is revealed before Hashem. Hashem said, it's not that I need to see the blood to know which house is Jewish, but I want to set my eyes to see, so to speak, that you're occupied with my commandments. You're following the dictates of my teachings. You have the courage to have taken the idol of Egypt for 4 days, tie it to your bedposts, and then sacrifice it. I'll pass over you. The word of pasachti also means I will have compassion, I will spare. Skipping, leaping. He skipped over Bata Yisrael, the houses of Israel, the Bata Mitzrayim, to the houses of Egyptians, because there were neighborhoods where they were intertwined, one and the other. Jew, Egyptian, Jew. The expression is also used, how long will you leap between two opinions, standing on the fence? All those who are lame, who go as if they're leaping. These are various usages of the word. But the Egyptians will be plagued. What if there happened to be at that moment an Egyptian in the house of a Jew? Yochel, I would think he would be saved because he's in a Jewish home. Talmud lemer, there will be no plague upon you. But it will come upon the Egyptian, who are in your houses. On the other hand, if there was a Jew, an Israelite, in the house of an Egyptian, I would think, he would be smitten. What's he doing in the house of an Egyptian? Talmud leimar, there will be no plague. 14, this day shall be lachem to you l'zikaron, as a memorial. You shall observe it and celebrate it. Chag as a festival, Hashem to Hashem. L'deirei sechem, throughout all your generations. Chukas elam, an eternal ordinance. Tichagu, shall you celebrate it. 14, l'zikaron, as a memorial, l'deirei, for all generations. A day which is to you a memorial. You shall keep. We still don't know which day. Remember this day, which you have left, the day of the Exodus. The day of the Exodus is the day of memorial. What day is this? The day after the Paschal sacrifice. Paschal sacrifice was the 14th. Haviyomar. Therefore, the holiday is Yom Chamish Asar B'Nisan, the 15th, which is today, the first day of Pesach. The first Seder is between the 14th and the 15th. Who shall Yom Tov? The 15th is Yom Tov. Sharei Chamish Asar Achlovas HaPesach. They consumed the Paschal sacrifice the eve before the 15th of Beker Yotzu, and the next morning at noon they left. L'deirei Sechem, throughout your generation, Shemeani, I would think, Miyadei Shnayim, minimum generations is 2. Talmud Leimer Chukas Elam Chagu, in eternal ordinance shall you celebrate it. 15. Now the Torah tells us, how long is this holiday? Shivas Yomim Matzis Techelav. 7 days you shall eat matzos. However, by Yom Rishon on the first day, Tashbisu, you shall destroy So'er, any leavening, remove any leavening mibatechem from your households. Ki, because Kol Eichel Chometz, anyone who eats leavened bread, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. This law applies from the 1st through the 7th. So we learn a lot of details here. Rashi helps us understand. First of all, Shivas Yomim is a Shteiner Shel Yomim, a set of 7 days. Shivas Yomim Matzah Techelu. For 7 days you must eat matzah. I would think that every Jew has the obligation. He must eat matzah for 7 days. Not so. Why? Another place to Lamer. 6 days you shall eat matzah. Limud. So if one place says 6, the other place says 7. This teaches us Al Shvi that the 7 days shall Pesach HaPesach. Sheina Chav, it's not an obligation lechal matzah. You don't have to eat matzah the 7th day of Pesach. As long as you don't eat chametz, as long as you don't eat bread. That's step 1. How do we know that also the 6 days are optional? You want to eat matzah, eat it. You don't want to eat it, don't eat it. Just don't eat chametz. It says 7 days. Zu mida b'Torah. This is a rule of the Torah, one of the 13 attributes which are used for interpretation of the Torah. What is the rule? Davar shaya b'klal, something that was included in a statement, such as the 7th day. The yotzam min haklal, and leaves the general statement. L'lamed, to teach you. What does it teach you? There's a special teaching here for the 7th day. L'lamed alatzvei b'lvad, it doesn't teach for itself alone. Yotza, that's why it came out of the category of 7 and became 6. L'lamed al kol kul yotza. But it teaches for the whole generalization. What is the lesson here? Just as the 7th day is optional, you want to eat matzah, eat. You don't want to, don't eat, but don't eat chametz. The fact is that the other 6 days also have the same law. The only reason we eat matzah at all, other than the Seder nights, are because we have to have a festival meal and we need a whole challah. We don't eat challah, so we need a whole matzah to make hamotzi. But theoretically, you don't have to eat matzah per se. However, the first night, the Seder night, and in the diaspora, the 2 Seder nights, I would think that they're also optional. No, Talmud Leimer. But Erev Techlo Matzahs, there's another verse that says in the evening you must eat matzahs. The Torah stipulates that it's an obligation. You have to get rid of the chametz the day before Pesach. The Kodesh is called the first day, the 14th, because it's the day before the 7th. We find that a day that precedes is called Rishon. So we have the first day, which is the 14th, then we have 7 days from the 15th. In the diaspora, we have an 8th day. Maybe it means the first of the 7th. Don't sacrifice the Paschal lamb while there's still chametz, which is why today even we get rid of the chametz when Erev Pesach. When it is knowing, when it is conscious. This excludes someone who is forced. Be cut off from Israel and becomes part of another nation. This Jew who eats chametz is cut off from Hashem. 16 the first of the 7 days is a major festival, a day of convocation in the diaspora, the first 2 days. And the 7th day is a day of holy convocation, a major festival in the diaspora, the 7th and the 8th days. Yelchem shall be to you, no major labor shall be done in them. Yom Tov, we do not engage in major labor, with the exception of that which needs to be done for food, l'chol nefesh, for every man, that's the only commandment, that's the only labor that may be done. And in general terms, the major difference between the Shabbos prohibitions and the festive prohibitions have to do with labor connected to food, carrying, cooking, and so on and so forth. Mikra Kodesh, Mikra Shem Dover, this is the noun, Kro Ise Kodesh, proclaim it as holy, Lachilu Shtia, Uksus, for eating, drinking, and garments. We eat better on Yom Tov, we dress better on Yom Tov. Lo Yosef Behem Afel Yedei Achedim, even through others, Hu Levadei Hu V'lei Machshidav, Shech Shel Asesem Erev Yom Tov. Just because we can cook certain things on the festival doesn't mean we can go shopping on the festival. Anything that can be done before the festival should be done. Why is cooking permitted? So it'd be fresh for Yom Tov. Even cooking, there are limitations. We have to learn the halacha. Even for an animal. I would think even to cook for the nations of the world. This is specifically for you, for a Jew who has to observe the Yom Tov. And if the nations of the world are going to join you in your Yom Tov feast in very general terms, make sure that you're not cooking specifically for them, but they're just being invited to the general food which exists. And again, this is not a class for halacha, but it's important today to point out the various observations of halacha. 17, Ushmartem es hamatzes. You must guard the matzes. Make sure they don't get wet. Because in the middle of this day, I brought forth your host from the land of Egypt. You must observe this day, for all your generations, as an eternal ordinance. 17. What are we watching the matzahs for? That they not become leavened, which is why baking matzah is so important. That's why we try to bake matzah within 18 minutes. That's why matzah is watched from the time it is cut. That's called shmura matzah. From here we say, if the dough rises, then the kneader should moisten it with cold water. And in general, we try and do it as quick as possible. It's a good idea to visit and tour a matzah bakery to see the alacrity of the speed that goes on. Rabbi Yeshua says there's a separate lesson here. We don't have to read this word matzos, L-T-K-S-A matzos, L-S-A mitzvos. Matzos and mitzvos. Matzos means matzah. Mitzvos means commandments, are written the same. Just as we shouldn't let matzah become leavened and sour, we shouldn't let a mitzvah get sour. If a mitzvah opportunity comes to your hand, engage in it, do it, fulfill it immediately. From labor. For all your generations eternally. It doesn't say generations and ordinances forever regarding labor. Only celebration. Therefore, repeats it. You shouldn't say that the prohibition for labor on the first and seventh day was only given for that generation. 18. This festival spans for 7 days in the diaspora. 8. On the first day, 14th of the month, which is Erev Pesach, Erev in the evening. That's when you eat matzah, the Seder night. Until the 21st day of the month. Why does it say, it already says 7 days? Why do we need dates? Because it says days. How do we know nights? Until the 21st day, including nights span. 19. Shivas Yom for 7 days. Se'er. 11. Lo shall not be found b'vatechem in your houses. Ki, because kol eichel machmetzes. Anybody who eats leavening, v'nichas on that soul shall be cut off. Ve'adas Yisrael from the congregation of Israel. Bager, whether that person is a convert, uve'ezrach ha'aretz, or homeborn. 19. Lo yimotzi b'vatechem minayin l'gvul. And how do we know that this applies to all borders? All borders. Why does it say your house is ma'beischa b'rshuscha? Your house means your possession. Your border, your possession. Yotzo, this excludes chametz shel nochri. What if the chametz, the leavening, belongs to a non-Jew? Shuetzel Yisrael, in the house of a Jew. He's not responsible for it. The non-Jew has a place in the house of a Jew where he keeps his leavening. That's perfectly okay as long as the Jew will not accidentally have access to it. That's the idea of the Jew selling his chametz to a non-Jew and still keeping it locked up in his own house. The punishment will be the cutting off of the soul al aser on leavening as well, not only on bread. You already said about eating bread. You shouldn't say that bread which can be eaten. The Torah punishes the cutting off of the soul. Leavening, it cannot be eaten. There should be no punishment. Therefore, even leavening, the punishment applies. If the Torah only tells us about leavening, not about bread itself, I would say, leaven, which causes other substances to become chametz. There's the punishment. Chametz, but chametz, that doesn't. The law applies to both equally. Because the miracle was wrought for the Jewish people. I would think if somebody converts, what connection does he have to the Pesach miracle? He wasn't even Jewish at that time. No, he's as Jewish as the Jew. If somebody converts according to Jewish law, according to Allah, he becomes as Jewish as the next guy and has to observe Pesach as well as if he was in Egypt. He has to include converts. 20. Any leavening shall not be eaten. In all of your habitations, you shall eat. If you want to eat grain, only matzah is Rashi. You cannot eat leavening. Anything that becomes mixed up with leavening, this comes to teach. It should be fit to be eaten in all your habitations. Excluding the second tithe or the loaves of the Todah offering, which can only be eaten in Jerusalem. Obviously, we went a little faster because the portion is extremely long. There are a lot of details that were not covered, of course, that we cannot cover in a class setting like this. And, of course, we have to we have to continue to learn and study and examine the commentaries on Rashi and go through the Mishnah and the Talmud. But in this class, we try and keep a pace. This was a long, complex day's portion, so forgive the speed of this portion. End of Chumash portion.
Jewish audio on Chabad.org.
Good morning and welcome. Today's Chumash portion for Thursday of Parshat Bo. We're learning about the Paschal sacrifice. Vayikra Moses called L'chol Ziknei Yisrael, to all the elders of Israel. We learned earlier that elders means leaders. Vayomer aleim, and he said to them, Mishchu, draw. And we learned earlier that Mishchu has to do with withdrawing from idol worship as well. There were two components here. One was the withdrawal of idol worship by having the courage to declare, I am going to offer the sheep, which is the deity of Egypt, to God, by tying it to the bedpost, as we learned earlier, for 4 days from the 10th
until the 14th of the month. That's the statement of mishchu, to withdraw, remove oneself from idol worship. There was also a positive component, which we're going to learn about, and that is the blood of circumcision. That night they circumcised themselves as well, which they hadn't done for many years in Egypt. Mishchu, draw forth, or draw out, u'chulachem, and take for yourselves, tzon, sheep, or lambs, or goats, as we learned earlier, lemishbechesechem, family by family, v'shachatu, and slaughter haposach, the paschal sacrifice. This was the paschal sacrifice offered in Egypt while they were still in Egypt. On Erev Pesach, on the day before Pesach, they offered a paschal sacrifice and they made a seder. 21, Rashi, Mishchu, Mishi, Yesh Leitzain, anyone who has sheep, Yimshech Mishalei, should take of his own. If the Jew happened to have a sheep or a lamb or a goat, he can take his own. And whoever doesn't, Mishain Le Yikach Min Hashuk, should go buy one. Where's a Jew in Egypt going to buy a sheep? On eBay. A lamb according to their father's house, one per family, and we learned in yesterday's portion or the day before that it has to do with population, how big the family is. Sometimes you need two families to sign up together. There's a ritual which goes along with this. But first, on 21, the Baal HaTurim says that the word mishchu has the numerical value, min aveira, to withdraw from sin, that although it was critically important that they bring this paschal sacrifice, they have to buy it and not steal it. It has to belong to them. You can't do mitzvahs with stolen goods. 22, Ulekachtem, you shall then take agudas, a bunch, a group of ezob grass, hyssop grass, a particular type of grass. You should make like a brush out of the blades of grass. Utvaltem, you shall immerse, dip, badom, the brush, the blades of grass, dip it into the blood, asher basaf, that's in the basin, like the LA basin. Vigatem, and you should reach out and touch. The lintel, which is the top of the door, and the two doorposts. Min hadam, make an application of the blood, asher basaf, which is in the basin. So you go blood, put some blood on the top and side posts. The atem, and you, or as they say in New Orleans, yal, leiseitzu ish mi pesach beisei ad beker. No one should leave the doorway of their house until morning. Stay in your house all night. The night of the 14th leading to the 15th. The next day they would leave. This was the night of the plague of the firstborn, the 10th plague. Rashi, ezo, grass, min yerek, sheyesh legiv ulin. It's a type of herb which has capsules. This is the type of grass. Agudas, ezo, aguda is a group. Shleisha klochen, 3 stalks of this grass. Korean aguda is called a group. A group is 3. Asher basof, bichli, kimei sipes kosef, like the basin, a basin of silver. Min adom asher basof. Why does it repeat this? To apply of the blood. Lama chazer ushnoi. Why does it repeat it? You shouldn't say tvil achas l'shalosh hamakonis. You have to apply it 3 times. Right doorpost, left doorpost, top lintel. Don't say you immerse this group of blades of grass once in the basin. Every application, min hadom asher basov, should be from the blood in the basin. I'll call hago every time you touch the doorpost or the lintel. Tefillah, you immerse it again. You should not leave your house. Magi, this teaches us. See, there's a big question here. Why can't they leave their house? We just learned yesterday, I believe, that if a Jew is in the house of an Egyptian, nothing would happen to him. If an Egyptian was in the house of a Jew and he was a firstborn, even though he was in the house of a Jew and had the blood on the doorpost, he would die. So what's the big deal? Why can't the Jews leave their houses? So Rashi explains, although God himself, God Almighty himself, brought about the plague of the firstborn and saved the Jewish firstborn, and God Almighty himself took the Jews out of Egypt, nevertheless, because this was a night of destruction, when destructive powers are given free reign, sometimes the energies go wild, and they don't clearly distinguish between someone who's still righteous and someone who crossed the border into wickedness. In general, nights are dangerous. There's destroyers out there, dangerous elements out there at night. All of the wild animals of the woods, of the forest, creep around at night. So therefore, in general, the nighttime is dangerous. It doesn't mean that necessarily the Jew is going to be mistaken for an Egyptian. That's not going to happen. Actually, the Rebbe gave it this particular subject. And the Rebbe explained an interesting interpretation based upon a teaching of the Ragat Shover, who was one of the great teachers of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe explained that the Ragat Shover points out that usually when it talks about sprinkling blood, the expression in the Torah is vihiza. He should sprinkle. Here it's vihigatem. He should touch. So in a sense, it was not only important that you sprinkle the blood as it was by many sacrifices, and then you go home, but here vihigatem, you had to make sure that the blood truly stayed up on the doorpost and on the lintel. So in a sense, the Ragat Shover explains that the house of every Jew became like his Beis Hamikdash that night. This is the blood of the offering, had to be on this location. And therefore, he had to be in his holy temple all night. So that's the reason he had to stay there, is not because of danger, but because this was his offering, this was his holy setting. That's a point that the Rebbe makes in this particular talk. Verse 23, the Oven Hashem Lin Gave Mitzrayim, and God would pass through. to smite the Egyptians. But you would see us, Hadom, the blood, ala mashke on the lintel and the two doorposts, ufosach Hashem ala Pesach. And God would pass over the door. That's where they get the name Passover. And he will not allow the energies of destruction to come to your houses, to smite you. Rashi says, he'll have mercy. Others say, he'll pass over. He's not going to enable it to come. 24, you shall guard this mitzvah, you shall guard this thing, as a statute for you, and for your offspring, ad elam, forever. 25. There's an interesting Balaturim on 22. The Balaturim says, min hadom, from the blood, 22. It says the Balaturim, min hadom, has a numerical value of dmei mila, the blood of circumcision. That this also referred to the blood of circumcision, that the Jewish people were circumcised that night. 25, shall come to pass, when you will come to the land, meaning Israel. Asher yitan Hashem lachem, which God will give you, kasher diber, as he spoke. Ushmartem es you shall observe and keep this service. Which service? Paschal sacrifice. Rashi, the Torah connects the obligation for this service with entry into the Holy Land. What about during their period of sojourn, of dwelling in the desert? Did they have to bring the Paschal sacrifice or not? They were only obligated in the desert to bring only one Paschal sacrifice, the first one, which they made in year 2. By the command, by the specific command of God. Year 1, they were still in Egypt. Year 2, they brought the Paschal sacrifice, and that's when the whole Pesach Sheni conversation came about. And after that, there was no Paschal sacrifice obligated in the desert. And I shall bring you into the land. 26, shall come to pass. If your children will say to you, what is this service to you? And this is referring to one of the 4 sons. There are 4 similar verses. One refers to the Chacham, to the wise son. One, I believe this one refers to the Rasha, the wicked one. Then there's the Tam, the simple one. Then there's the Bisheni, the Elish, the one who doesn't even know how to ask. What if your children will tell you in the future, what are you doing? What is this strange custom while you're bringing the Paschal sacrifice? 27, and you shall tell them, you know what this is? This is not some meaningless ritual. This is an offering of Paschal sacrifice, Passover. Asher Pasach, we are commemorating the fact that God passed over Al-Bote b'nei Yisrael, the houses of the Jewish people, of the children of Israel, b'im Mitzrayim in Egypt, because an amazing, wondrous thing happened. Every firstborn died, except for the Jewish firstborn. When he plagued Egypt, and he saved our houses. House by house, not one Jewish firstborn was harmed. Miracle. Going back to this narrative, the people heard Moshe. They bowed, and they fell full-faced upon the ground. Because they're being told about redemption. They're being told about entering into the land. And they're being told that they'll have children. Because in order for your children to ask you questions, you have to have children. One of the greatest miracles of the Seder is that you have children to sit at the Seder. That's a blessing in and of itself. The Balaturim here points out. No, that's 28. Okay, 28. And the Jewish people went and they did exactly Kasher Tziva Hashem, as Moshe Aaron, as God commanded Moshe and Aaron. Cain also, so they did. Rashi, says Rashi, let's remember the chronology here. This is all going on, happening on the first day of Nisan. On the first day, God commanded Moshe, and Moshe commands the Jewish people, that when the 10th day comes, they should take the sheep, lamb, goat, tie it to their bedpost, and on the 14th day they should offer it, etc., etc. Why does it say Vayochel Vayasu? We haven't even read about the plague of the firstborn. Also, did this already happen? We're talking about the chronology here. Has a Rosh Chodesh on day 1 of Nisan. Hello, we learn an important lesson from here. That when it comes to good things, good intentions are considered as if they're already done. Being that they accepted upon themselves this obligation, Hashem considers it, as far as they're concerned, also as if they did it. And here we have an interesting principle, that machshava tova, if a Jew has a good, positive thought. For example, somebody says, I'm making a lot of money, I'm going to donate $1 million. Actually, $1 million today is nothing. $1 billion. Okay. And then, God forbid, he invested all his money on AIG and he lost all his money. So he doesn't have $1 billion or $1 million. The fact that he intended to do it and it was a serious intention, the mitzvah he already has. Whereas a wicked person, if he intends to do something wicked and then for reasons beyond his control, he's prevented from doing it, he's punished for doing it. So that is the advantage of a righteous person, the disadvantage of a wicked person. So that is what he's saying here. The Torah considers it as if he did it because he intended to do it. The going is also a mitzvah. That's what we call in Jewish life schar halicha. You bill for travel time. Going to shul is also a mitzvah. And therefore, the further you walk, the greater the mitzvah. This tells the praiseworthiness of Israel. They didn't skip even one detail from all the commandments of Moshe and Aaron. What does it mean, Kain Osu? Moshe and Aaron, Kain Osu. Interesting teaching that Moshe and Aaron did not say, you do it, and I'm in charge. But they also did it. The leadership also has to perform mitzvahs. There's a balaturim here that say, Vayasu Kain Osu. Two doings. One representing that they did the paschal sacrifice, the other representing that they also did the circumcision, which we've alluded to earlier in the various commentaries. That was the two bloods we talked about, I believe, in yesterday's portion, end of today's Chumash portion.
Jewish audio on Chabad.org.
Good morning, welcome. Today's Chumash portion, the Shishi portion, the Friday portion for Bo, page 115 in the Chumash we use here. Chapter 12, verse 29, we're learning the story of the Jewish people emerging from bondage, from slavery in Egypt, and we're about to learn about the 10th plague. Vayehi, and it came to pass, Bachatzi alayla, at exactly midnight, Vahashem, and God, Hika, smote, hit, kol bechor, every firstborn, Be'eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. Beginning with Pharaoh's firstborn, who sits on the throne, the crown prince, Ad, all the way down the economic line, up to Becher Hashvi, the firstborn of the captive, Asher Bebeis Haber was in the dungeon, and everybody in between, Becher Behema, as well as the firstborn of the cattle. And in general, the importance of the firstborn in this culture is the political leaders, the leaders of every family were the firstborn. That was the cultural system. The firstborn was the number one guy, the leader, and that is the importance of, in general, the firstborn in this culture, translating into the Torah, in the Egyptian culture, therefore the birthright and the whole 9 yards. It's important for us to understand in our culture, in many cultures today, the firstborn doesn't take the same prominence as it once did, but in Torah it does, and certainly in these cultures it did. Okay, that was just a little P.S. Rashi, Vahashem, Kol Mokim Shenever Vahashem. Rashi tells us a rule. Whenever the Bible uses the word Vahashem and God, what does it teach us? It amplifies. It's suggesting something. Hu ubeis dina. It means God and his court. God has a heavenly court. It's like the Congress, the Senate and the Congress. God doesn't like to act alone. He has a heavenly court of angels. Shahavov, Loshen Tesefesu. The Vav is always an amplification. To make plainy, so and so. And Hika, Kol B'cher, all firstborn. What is the amplification of Kol B'cher? Af Shel Uma Acheres, V'hu B'Mitzrayim. Even if there was a firstborn of a visiting country who found himself in Egypt, he was also smitten. This was the death of the firstborn. Mib'cher Pare, Af Pare B'chor Hoya. What about Pharaoh himself? Was he a firstborn? The answer is yes. So did he die? The answer is no. He got like a, I don't know if they had Monopoly back then, but a get-out-of-jail-free card. He was the lone survivor of the firstborn, like the Lone Ranger. Regarding him, it says that God says, I let you live so that you can see the misery. In order that I show you my might, at the sea, because if Pharaoh would have died as a firstborn, then he would never see the miracle at sea. So in order that he get to see the sea, he survived. Ad Becher Hashvi. What did the captive firstborn do? We talked about this earlier. The firstborn in prison were also anti-Semitic. They were also miserable. They also hated Jews. They rejoiced at the tzoros of the Jew. And furthermore, so that they should not say, it's our God that brought about this affliction. And the firstborn of the maidservant was included, because he goes through the whole spectrum, from the most important to the least, down the economic line. So the firstborn of the maidservant is one notch up from the firstborn of the prisoners. Okay, but this is all happening at midnight. It's unbelievable. Pharaoh woke up at midnight. Who? Both he, Bechol Avodav, and all of his servants. Bechol Mitzrayim. The entire Egypt woke up at midnight. There was a tremendous outcry in Egypt. They were shrieking and yelling. Why? There was not one house without a corpse in it. There was death all over. 30, Pare woke up from his slumber, from his bed. Laila at night. Not like kings who wake up 9 o'clock in the morning. Shalosh Shoyos means in the third hour. The first hour is 6 a.m. in a normal 12-hour day. And then you have 7 a.m., 8 a.m. And then the third hour is between 8 and 9 o'clock. He first, and then his servants. This teaches us that Pharaoh went around from house to house and woke up everyone and said, hey, what's going on? You too? You too? Yes, if there was a firstborn, a biological firstborn, he died. If there was no biological firstborn, not particular. Gadol Shababayis, they took the oldest one of the house, the senior, the leader. Shenemar. It says in Tehillim, chapter 89, King David expresses, speaking on behalf of Hashem, Af oni b'cheiratnei, will appoint him a firstborn. He's the leader in the house. He's the man of the house. Davar achar, another interpretation. How could it be that every house had a firstborn who died? Not every house has necessarily a firstborn. The answer is that you can have 6, 8, 10 children in a house, and they could all be firstborn. How could that be? Depends who the father is. The morality of the Egyptian women was not good. They were unfaithful to their husbands, and they had relationships with single bachelors. So there was a lot of firstborn. There's an opinion that says this was before DNA testing. You can have 5 firstborn for one woman, because each one is a firstborn. This one's the pool man, and this one's the gardener, and so on and so forth. I'm just kidding. They didn't even have pools then. Maybe King Solomon had a pool. Verse 31, so Pharaoh sent a text to Moshe and Aaron, Lila, at night, in the middle of the night, and he said, Kumu, rise up, get out of my land, leave from my people. Gamatem, Yal, Gam b'nei Yisrael, with all the children of Israel, we don't want you here. All along, for the past year or so, they've been saying, let our people go so we can serve our God in the desert. Go serve God. As you spoke, just get out of here. Magid, this teaches us. I was kidding about the texting. There's an opinion that they didn't even have cell phones then. He went door to door. And he was crying, where does Moses live? Where does Aaron live? Gamatem, you, Hagvarim, the men, because originally Pharaoh said, you want to go offer sacrifices to God? That's a men's thing. Women don't offer sacrifices. That's a men's thing. It's a very sexist community. Gam b'nei Yisrael, hatov the children. Take men, women, let everybody go. Pharaoh said, uncle, I surrender. Whatever you said, go. Not as I said. Botel, my claim of I will not send, that's over. Good morning. I said, who's going? Over. Don't give me any lists. I said, your sheep and cattle should remain here. That's an old too. Take everything. Just go. And Pharaoh is the author of these famous words. He said to Moshe and to Aaron, you're killing me, Larry. Verse 32. Take your sheep and take your cattle. As you spoke. And go. And say a little prayer for me. And bless me. Bless my soul. What does it mean as you spoke? We learned earlier that Moshe said to Pharaoh, you're telling us we can't take our sheep and cattle? By the time we go, you're going to give us sheep and cattle. Maybe you need some extra sheep and cattle. Can I give you some sheep and cattle? Go to the palace barn, take some sheep. Take anything, take whatever you want. Bless me. Why is Pharaoh asking for blessing? All of a sudden, I pray for me. Almost that I shouldn't die. I don't know if God knows, but I'm a firstborn too. They tell a story of this 95-year-old guy. It was Yom Kippur, and he was walking around. He wasn't shul. So this guy says, you're a religious man. Why don't you go to shul? It's Yom Kippur. He says, shh, I think God forgot about me. If he forgot about me, I shouldn't remind him. So Pharaoh says, say a little prayer for me. Somehow I survived this debacle. Verse 33, the Egyptians were very hard on the people. Come on, Schnell, quickly, get out of here. Why were they so excited that the Jewish people should go? Because all along, they said, let my people go or. And they had too many ours. So they're saying, they said, Kulonu Mesim, we're all dying. Let's get the Jewish people out. Maybe we'll survive. Kulonu Mesim, they said, this is not turning out like the decree which Moses predicted. Because Moses said, every firstborn is going to die. But you know what? More than that is happening. There must have been a technical glitch in the computer system. The even the non-firstborn are dying. 5 or 10 in the house. Therefore, we need the Jewish people out. Now remember that we learned about a mitzvah that God gave the Jewish people to offer a paschal sacrifice and to have matzah and moror. So this midnight massacre of the firstborn, that was the night of the Seder night. The Jewish people were just finishing their Seder. They were singing Chad Gadya. So the people took their dough, terem yachmot, before it was even leavened. As they heard they were leaving, they started baking. Mishareisam, their kneading troughs, suros, were bound up. Bisimleisam, in their clothing, al shichmam, slung over their shoulders. And that's where the coloring books get the pictures of the Jewish people with the pillowcase slung over their shoulders. Terem yachmot, hamitzrim, leinichim, lishis kedei chimutz. The Jewish people said that they're leaving, so they started baking. They should have some sandwiches for the way. But the Egyptians are saying, come on, quickly. Mishareisam shiori matzu mora. What they took was leftovers of the Seder. Leftover matzah, leftover mora. Al shichmam, apal pisha behemis arbe yodichimam. Now, we know that they took many animals with them. Why did they need to carry their food? Because in these garments, in these pillowcases, so to speak, were the mitzvah food from the celebration. This was very precious to them. Something that's precious to you, you take as hand luggage. You don't check it in baggage. Now, remember earlier, the Jewish people were commanded that when they leave Egypt, they should ask the Egyptians for 3 different categories of items. They were told to ask for silver, gold, and designer garments. If it was from Sears or Mervyn's, all of Shalom, it wasn't good. It had to be from Bloomingdale's or Nordstrom's or Beverly Hills boutiques were also okay. Uvenei Yisrael also kidvar Moshe, the children of Israel did exactly as Moshe commanded. Vayish'alu miMitzrayim, and they asked of the Egyptians, klei chesed u'klei zohav, vessels of silver, vessels of gold, usmolis, and various garments. Rashi kidvar Moshe shalom Mitzrayim, because Moshe said to them earlier in Egypt, v'yish'alu ish me'es re'eyu, let every man ask his neighbor. So the Jewish people listened, and they went to their neighbors, and they said, excuse me, good neighbor, I'm going to be going on a 3-day journey. Can I borrow your best china, your best silver, your best gold? And they said, take anything you want, just get out of here. Just take. I'll open my safe, anything you want. Usmoles, why does he enumerate the garments last? We learn from here that the garments were more precious than the silver and gold, because it goes from the bottom up. And he enumerates the most precious and the most expensive at the end. So the garments were more expensive than the silver and the gold. They had very good tailors. Now, did the Egyptians give them what they asked for? 36, Hashem and God. Nosan gave Eschein Ha'am, the grace of the people. The people were charismatic, Ve'enei Mitzrayim, in the eyes of the Egyptians. Vayashilim, they gave them whatever they wanted. Take. Vayanatzlu es Mitzrayim, by the time the Jewish people left Egypt, they emptied out Egypt. There was not one precious thing left in Egypt. Vayashilum, maybe some stainless steel stuff. But all the silver and gold was gone. Even the stuff they didn't ask him for, they gave them. The Egyptian says, you want 1? Tell Shnaim, take 2, just go. They emptied out. The expression is, they left Egypt like a fisherman's net without fish, like a granary sifter without grain. 37, and the Jewish people made that famous journey, made Ramses, from the neighborhood called Ramses, Sukkos, to the neighborhood called Sukkos. There were about 600,000 feet, meaning 600,000 foot soldiers, meaning men. The number that is usually quoted when we talk about the exodus out of Egypt, the number that I heard in New Jersey is 2.5 million. How do you get to 2.5 million? If you have 600,000 men between the age of 20 and 60, plus the men under 20 and the men over 60, plus the women, the mathematics comes to about 2.5 million. So the 600,000 are men between the ages of 20 and 60, besides the kids in school and the people collecting Social Security. Hagvorim, these are the men, levad mitof, in addition to the niños. This is without the pediatrics and without the geriatrics. This was 120 mil. This distance of Osham Lefishon, they came quickly. A mil is somewhat less than a mile. God says, I bore you on eagle's wings, which means fast track. They were in the carpool lane. 20 years and older. Now, what happened was that suddenly everybody wanted to be Jewish. There's a big sign, a billboard, you don't have to be Jewish to eat Levi's, remember that? Suddenly everybody says, me too. There was also a mixed multitude of Egyptians and other cultures, all ate them. They all went, this is good. A little bit like when the Russians left Russia to go to Israel, suddenly everybody's Jewish. And sheep and cattle, there was so much cattle, it was unbelievable. And everybody, they were clogging the highways. There was a traffic jam, a bottleneck. A mixture of nations. Suddenly everybody wants to join the Jewish people. By the way, we learned later that this mixed multitude created a lot of problems in the desert, because as long as the going was good, the going was good. But then it became not so good. Oh, mitzvahs we got to do too. We didn't want mitzvahs, we just wanted the money. 39, so they baked the dough, which they brought forth from Egypt. Uges matzes, unleavened cakes. That's where matzah comes from. Kilo chametz, because it did not have a chance to rise. And by the way, there's a lot of discussion in commentaries on Torah that there are 2 types of matzah. There is the pre-midnight matzah and the post-midnight matzah. The pre-midnight matzah is the matzah they baked for their Seder the night before, because they were commanded to have the Paschal lamb together with matzah. Then there was the matzah they were baking for the road, which didn't have an opportunity to rise. And spiritually, you have the before-midnight matzah and the post-midnight matzah and everything that they represent. But there are 2 distinct types of matzahs that collide into one here. It's important because we get confused. On the one hand, we say, well, they had matzah because the bread didn't rise. That's true. The dough didn't rise. On the other hand, they went and baked matzah the day before. So they're both true. Why is it that the dough didn't have a chance to rise? Because they were kicked out of Egypt, chased out, and they couldn't wait. They didn't make provisions. They had no sandwiches. Had they known that they were going, this was a sudden thing. Say, go! Had they known they were going right now, they would have made sushi. Without even a question. Uges matzah, certainly the Japanese from the Arab would have made the sushi. Cakes of unleavened bread. Any dough which did not become sour is called matzah. Any dough that doesn't leaven, that doesn't rise. Like the sign on the building campaign, we're on the rise, we need your dough. For the road. Magi, this teaches us Shivchan, the praiseworthiness of Israel. The Jewish people did not say, are you crazy? You want us to go into the desert? We have to prepare, we got to make sandwiches. How are we going to go out into the desert? Without food? We need food. The Jewish people, they believed that God would provide, and they went into the desert. This is what it says. Whenever Rashi or commentaries of that ilk refer to Kabbalah, it doesn't mean Kabbalah. It means the prophets. Jeremiah says, Zacharti loch chesed niurayach. This is a famous quote from the Rosh Hashanah service. It's not that Zechariah quotes the Rosh Hashanah service. It's that the Rosh Hashanah service takes it from Zechariah. I remember the kindness of your youth. God says, I remember to the Jew the kindness of your youth. Ahavas kulesayach, the love of when you were betrothed to me. Lechtech achrei bamidbar, how you followed me into the desert. Be'eretz lezeru, in a land that was not sown, not planted. There was no food. As I like to say, not even a 7-Eleven. Hashem says, I'll never forget that. My dad, of blessed memory, used to say here, it's like a doctor who becomes a very successful doctor. That was once upon a time when my dad was young doctor. They were very successful doctors. And he makes a lot of money, and he turns to his wife and he says, I'll never forget you when I was a penniless student in medical school. You followed me. We lived in a half a room. I'll never forget your love, how you followed me. I didn't have a dime. And Hashem says, I made all kinds of promises to you. You followed me into the desert without a 7-Eleven. Be'eretz leizruah, in a land that was not sown. What reward is there? That Israel becomes God's hallowed possession. It's like the doctor says to his wife, I'll always be faithful to you. You'll always be mine because you were there when I had nothing, before I had all this stuff. Again, that was a different time. Okay. Now the Torah tells us, very important verse, very confusing verse. Let me give an introduction to this verse. There are 3 numbers that we find relating to the time the Jewish people spent in Egypt. One number we find, which is the true number. And for us in the valley, it's always easy to remember. It's the number of the foothill freeway, 210. The Jewish people stayed in Egypt for 210 years. That's a fact. Now, there's another number that we talk about, and that is 400 years. 400 is not 210. The difference between 400 and 210 is 190 years. So the sages say that God deducted the 190 from the 210. He gave him a pass. Well, the Torah says 400 is 400. The answer is, this 400 comes from a proclamation that God made to Abraham. Your children will be strangers in a land that's not theirs for 400 years. That works, because the 400 years are from the birth of Isaac, from the moment Abraham had a child, the child of his legacy. When was Yitzchak or Isaac born? Pesach. The year 2048, the Hebrew year. When did the Jewish people emerge from Egypt? Pesach, on Isaac's birthday. Which birthday? His 400th birthday. Exactly, while they were blowing out the candles of the cake. The year 2448, 400 years to the second later. It still works when you say your children will be strangers in a land that's not theirs for 400 years, because wherever Isaac was, the moment he was born, he was a stranger. Because wherever he was a stranger. Even in Israel, he was a stranger. So that's the number 400. There's a third number, and that number is 430. What's with the 430? Sounds like cocktail time, 430. The number 430 represents the moment God said it to Abraham, because Abraham was 70 years old when God told him, your children will be strangers in a land that's not theirs for 400 years. That happened 30 years before he was 100 when Isaac was born. So we have the 210 number, the actual time they stayed in Egypt, the 400 from the birth of Yitzchak until Exodus. On his birthday, the 430, God spoke to him 30 years before that. Now let's learn. 40 Yomosha b'nei Yisrael, and the time that the Jewish people tarried. Asher Yoshu Mitzrayim, where they dwelled in Egypt. Shloshim Shana v'arba Shana, 430 years. Whoops, here's that 430 number. Now we know it's 210. Asher Yoshvu b'Mitzrayim. So Rashi explains. Achar Sha'ar Yeshivas Sheyoshvu Geirim Be'eretz Le'Lohem. This number represents the total of their journeying in all the lands that weren't theirs. Shloshim Shana v'arba Shana Beinakol in total. Mishnayla Yitzchak ad Asher, from the time Yitzchak was born until now. Hayo arba is 400. Mishnayla Zed Avram, from the time that a seed was born to Abraham, from the moment of Isaac's birth. This time that was fulfilled. The promise, Kigeri Yazaracha, your children will be strangers. And there was 30 years from the time this statement was made until Yitzchak was born. That's the 430. Now Rashi defends this. It's impossible to say that the 430 applies only to their dwelling time in Egypt. Because Kahos, Moshe's great-grandfather, was the one who came to Mitzrayim. Count all of his lifespan. And the lifespan of his son Amram. Which made him the 80 of Moshe. You're not going to find 430. And you must say, Har Beshonim Hayulikos, Achaliyodah Limitzrayim, that Kahos lived many years until he descended down to Egypt. Har Bishneis Amram, Niploim Bishneis Kos. When you have a father and a son and you count the total lifespan, you obviously have crossover years because the father doesn't usually have the son the day he dies. Many of the years of Moshe, 80, when they left Egypt, are included in his father's years. It's impossible to calculate 400 years from the time they came to Egypt. Therefore, you must say, that what this verse 430 or 400 refers to is all dwellings. Even earlier in Hebron, Abraham and Isaac lived. That the word, your seed will be a stranger from the moment he had children. When you calculate 400 years from Yitzchak's birth, so you'll find maybe Yosan the Mitzrayim from the moment of their arrival to Egypt, Ad Yitziyosan, until they left, Reish Yud 210. Now, there was the story of Talmai the king, who took 70 scholars, put them into different rooms, and told them translate the Torah. And they all did that. And they all made certain changes to uphold the validity of Torah. This was one of those changes, because the number 430 doesn't make sense. So they said 210. This is one of the changes that these sages made when King Talmai told them to translate the Torah into Greek or whatever it was. 41, it came at the end of 430 years. In the middle of this day, at noon, all the hosts of Hashem emerged from the land of Egypt. Maggid, this teaches us, when that moment of Exodus arrived, when? Pesach, noon, 2448, God didn't hold them up even a split second. 401 years earlier, 401, not to be confused with the 401k. 401 years earlier, the angel came and told Abraham, you and Sarah are going to have a baby. 1 year later, on the 15th of Nisan, Yitzchak was born. 400 years later, 30 years before that, the covenant was made. 430 years later, all of that on the 15th of Nisan. So therefore, this night leading up to the 15th of Nisan, which today we call the Seder night, is a special night. Or as they say in Israel, spatial. Ma'od spatial. Leil Shimurim Hu, it's a night of watching. L'Hashem, Hashem guards. L'Hitzion, God was watching for this day to bring them forth from the land of Egypt. Hu halayla hazeh, it's this night. L'Hashem to Hashem Shimurim, being watched by Hashem, the Chol Bnei Yisrael, for all the children of Israel, throughout all their generations. Leil Shimurim, Sheyakadosh Baruch Hu Shemer, Hashem was watching them and waiting. L'Kaim HaKachasi to fulfill his promise, to bring them forth. This night is to Hashem. This is the night that he said to Abram. And this night, I'm redeeming your children. Guarded against all evildoers. Traditionally, the Seder night is the night when Hashem watches over the Jewish people. We only recite an abridged Shema on the Seder night. Many people would leave their doors unlocked on the Seder night. Hashem will not allow the destroyer to come. Now, continuing with the next section, verse 43. We have a few more verses in today's portion. The laws of the Paschal sacrifice. Hashem said to Moshe and Aaron, and as Rashi explains, this was obviously said earlier, before the Paschal sacrifice. The Paschal sacrifice was brought on the 14th of Nisan. The Exodus was on the 15th of Nisan. So this was before the 14th of Nisan. Or the 14th of Nisan. Zeis chukas haposach. This is the law of the Paschal sacrifice. Number one, kol ben necher lo yochel by any stranger, any alien. An alien is a Martian. Any non-Jew may not eat from the Paschal sacrifice. It's only for Jews who are part of this program of Hashem's people, having been enslaved, and the Exodus and all of that. This section was stated on the 14th of Nisan. Kol ben necher, even a Jew whose deeds were estranged, a Jew who intentionally, God forbid, willfully removes himself from Judaism. He says, I am no longer a Jew. So therefore, even he, along with the non-Jew, should not be eating from the Paschal sacrifice. This is a special sacrifice, which is a sacrifice that a Jew who is connected to the commitment that Hashem gave him participates in. The Echad HaGoy, both a member of the nations of the world. The word Goy, by the way, means nation. A member of any nation of the world. The Echad Yisrael Mishumit, or a Jew who willfully leaves Judaism, B'mishma, should not partake of the Paschal sacrifice. And there are many laws pertaining to whom may partake and whom may not partake. One of the other laws is, as we're going to learn, that a male must be circumcised in order to be able to partake in this sacrifice. This is a very important experience with very strict laws. Now, what about slaves? The time that there was slavery, the meaning of a slave is a slave was owned by his master. So therefore, in Jewish law, a slave becomes part of the family. A slave purchased or born into a home of a Jew by Jewish law, going back then, became a Jew. The slave became a Jew. So, Eved, Ish, Miknas, Kosev, any man purchased with money, Malta, he's circumcised, then he can eat of the Paschal sacrifice because he becomes part of the family. There's two interpretations. One is that his master can eat if his slave is circumcised. Maggid teaches us that if somebody has an uncircumcised slave, that the lack of circumcision of someone in his household will prevent him from eating the Paschal sacrifice. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. No, that the slave has to be circumcised before he could eat. And in general, this is not the place for it, but it's interesting to learn the laws of slavery, which are coming up in a few portions, how the Torah is so concerned in a time when slavery was universal that be upheld in the most humane, gentle way. There are many fascinating laws which the Torah tells us about slave ownership in a time when everyone owned slaves. 45, a slave who becomes part of the family may eat of the Paschal sacrifice, but someone who just moves in with the family, a boarder, or a hired hand, an employee, may not eat of the Paschal sacrifice because he's not Jewish. This is a stranger settler. There's a law in the Torah of stranger settler. It means that if a non-Jew comes and says, hey, I want to live in Israel, I want to become part of the nation of Israel, but I don't want to be a Jew. The answer is, as long as he recognizes the sovereignty of the Jewish people over Israel, and he doesn't worship idols, and he doesn't violate the key commandments that God gave, universal commandments, he can live in Israel, but he doesn't have to keep mitzvahs. He can eat non-kosher and so on. That's called a ger toshav, a stranger settler. He has no business eating Paschal sacrifice. The sochir, or a hired hand, an employee, zegoy, he is from the nations of the world. He's not Jewish. Of course, they are uncircumcised. It says soon that an uncircumcised may or may not eat. What if there's an example, for example, such as an Arab who is circumcised? There are cultures who circumcise their children. Can they eat? The answer is no. They cannot eat even though they're circumcised. 46, the particular Paschal offering shall be eaten in one house. Don't take the flesh of the sacrifice out of the house. And don't even break a bone of it. Rashi, in one group. They shouldn't divide this one sacrifice into two groups. You say one group. Maybe it means one house. To teach you that if they were eating it in the backyard and it started to rain, they cannot go into the house. That's not so. Houses, plural. As long as the group is moving as a group, they can go to two places. They were outside, you can come inside. Meaning from the group. What kind of bone? As long as there's meat on the bone. A bone that's still edible. There's still the size of an olive of meat on it. Then you can't break the bone. If it no longer has the bulk of an olive of meat, then it doesn't matter whether you break the bone or not. 47, who has to do the Paschal sacrifice? The entire community of Israel has to do it. Why does this say? Because in the case of the Paschal sacrifice in Egypt, it says, a lamb according to their father's houses, where they did it by family. I would think later they did it by family as well. No, later the individuals were obligated. Everyone in Israel had to make it. 48, what if someone converts and becomes a ger tzedek, a bona fide convert? Then he wants to make a Paschal offering, that's fine. Conditional upon the fact that all his males should be circumcised. Then he can approach to offer this offering. The convert becomes like the native, like the homie. This is an important law in Jewish law, that when a non-Jew converts and becomes a Jew according to the teachings of halacha, then he joins the Jewish people and he becomes a full-fledged Jew, doing the mitzvahs that a Jew does. However, an uncircumcised male should never eat of the Paschal sacrifice. I would misunderstand this verse, says Rashi, and think that the moment somebody converts, they have to run and make a Paschal sacrifice, even if it's Hanukkah. I might think that anybody who converts immediately offers a Paschal sacrifice. Talmud Lamer, along comes the Torah and says, no. He becomes like a native. Just as a native Jew brings the Paschal sacrifice on the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach, so also the convert. What if there's a situation where Jewish law says to this Jewish kid, we can't circumcise you? Why? The halacha says that if there are two brothers in one family, God forbid, who die because of circumcision, usually it's a situation of hemophilia where the blood runs and they don't know how to stop it, and medicine was not as developed as it is today. So the halacha says the third brother may not be circumcised. He must go for the rest of his life uncircumcised. That's nice, but he also can't eat a Paschal sacrifice. He's not opposed to circumcision, but still, I believe, he may not eat from it. Verse 49, this is the verse I referred to earlier. There should be one teaching for the native, and the stranger, who lives amongst you. A convert is considered 100% Jewish in Jewish law. To make the converted Jew and the native Jew equal for all mitzvahs. The question that is asked in halacha is, how does a convert say, who made miracles for our forefathers when their forefathers were in Ireland? The answer is because they accept Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rachel, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah as their patriarchs and matriarchs. Yasu kol bnei Yisrael kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe v'Aaron. All the children of Israel did as God commanded Moses and Aaron. Cain also, they did exactly so. By he and it came to pass. In the middle of this day, 15th day of Nisan, first day of Pesach, Hatzi Hashem, God brought forth, as bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, they had Mitzrayim from the land of Egypt, al tzivosam by their hosts. End of today's Chumash portion.
Jewish audio on Chabad.org.
Good morning and welcome. We are pre-recording the Shabbos, the Shabbat class, the 7th portion of Bo, chapter 13. Daber Hashem el Moshe lemor, and God spoke to Moshe saying, the portion we're about to study is one of the 4 portions which is placed in every pair of tefillin. Tefillin have 4 portions within them. These are the 4 portions which discuss tefillin, and this is one of them. This is also the portion, being that we've spoken about the plague of the death of the firstborn of the Egyptians. This is the miraculous survival of the firstborn of the Jewish people, and the sanctification of the firstborn of the Jewish people, that the Jewish firstborn is now sanctified to become a Kohen, a priest in service in the Beis HaMikdash, in service in the Mishkan. And of course that never really happened because the Kohen had to replace the firstborn, because the firstborn was a leader, a mover and a shaker in the sin, in the transgression of the golden calf. But had there not been a transgression of the golden calf, the firstborn would be the Kohen. Also, the firstborn animal was sanctified to be holy. Kadesh li, sanctify for me, says God, kol b'cher, every firstborn. Peter, the one which opens, kol rechem, every womb. B'nei Yisrael, within the Jewish people, ba'adam, within man, of abheiman, within the animal world, li, who it belongs to me, says God. The firstborn is sanctified. Peter, kol rechem rashi, shepasach harechem tchila, opening the womb first, kimei peter mayim, reishis modern, v'chen yaftir b'sofa, yiftachu spasayim, opening the lips, the opening of the womb, firstborn. Li, who, la'atzmi konisi, for myself I have acquired it, al yedei, through the fact, shehi kesi b'chei Mitzrayim, I smote. I killed the Egyptian firstborn. I saved the Jewish firstborn, then I acquired for myself the Jewish firstborn. Growing up, I often heard from my father of blessed memory a teaching that my grandfather repeated, my Zayd Reb Yechanan Gordon. I also was privileged to hear it from him several times on this verse. He didn't make it up. That a broader symbolic interpretation of these verses. Verse 1, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, this interpretation says that God speaks to Moshe saying, Kadesh li, what is most holy and most important to me, kol bechor. Bechor means firstborn. First and foremost, what is most important to me, highest on my priority list, is Peter, the opening, kol rechem. Literally, rechem means a womb. But symbolically, it means rachmonos, the opening of compassion. Have compassion. B'nei Yisrael, for every Jew. You should be compassionate for every one of our fellow Jews. Ba'odom, uvabehema. The person says, you want me to be compassionate for my fellow human being? That's nice. That's if he acts like a mensch, if he acts like a human being. What if he acts like a behemoth? What if he acts like an animal? He's not the greatest guy in the world. Says God, li, who, that's my business. That's to me. You should be kind to everyone. So this is an interpretation of the importance of being compassionate and kind, even to people who are themselves a little on the coarse side. We still have to have compassion. Back to the text. Vayomer Moshe, Moshe said to the people, Zachar, you must remember. And this has to do with a verbal remembrance. There are 6 mitzvahs, 6 remembrances. They're listed in the Siddur at the end of the daily prayers. 6 things we must verbally mention daily. The Exodus of Egypt is one of them, rooted in this verse. As Hayom Hazeh this day, Asher Yetzosim, in which you went forth, Mitzrayim, from the land of Egypt, Beis Havadim, from the house of slaves. Remember this day, never forget. It's not something that you should forget. It happened a long time ago, let it go. No, you have to always remember. The miraculous Exodus from Egypt is an event which you must recall every day. We do that. The 3rd portion of the Shema recalls the Exodus from Egypt. Because with a mighty arm, with great strength, God took you forth from here. Egypt was the superpower. God humbled them with the 10 plagues. And therefore, to commemorate this miracle, below, you may not eat any leavening, any chametz. Rashi Zachar this teaches us, we have to verbally mention the miracle of the Exodus of Egypt daily. For Hayom Atem Yotzim, today you're coming forth, b'chodesh ha'aviv, in the month of spring. And we studied in our Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin class, which we have right here. We studied about the fact that the courts, the Sanhedrin, would get together in Jerusalem and would decide whether a leap year should be proclaimed or not. An extra Adar should be added or not. What did it depend upon? Many components. Primarily, it depended upon whether Pesach is going to come out in the spring or Pesach is going to dip into the winter. If Pesach is coming out too early, that was the most important detail which compelled the courts to proclaim a leap year. Where is it sourced? In this verse. B'chodesh ha'aviv. Pesach must be in the month, in the season of spring. Pesach cannot be in December. Even though it's nice to have a snowy Pesach, a white Pesach. Verse 4, in the season of spring, don't we know which month? God is telling them between the lines, look at how good I've been to you. God brought you forth in a season which has great weather. The spring has great weather. It's not too hot. In the summer, it's 130 degrees. It's not freezing, 30 below. It's not raining. It's perfect weather. Like San Diego, 70 degrees all year round. At least that's what it used to be. He brings forth the prisoners in their fitting time. The Jewish people are described as prisoners. The fitting time is spring. Chedesh kosher lotzes, in a season which is pleasant to come forth out of Egypt. Verse 5, it shall come to pass, when God will bring you to the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Chivites, and the Yebusites. So we have Canaani, Hitti, Amori, Chivi, and Yebusi. 5 of the 7 Canaanite nations are enumerated in this verse. Which God swore to your forefathers, lost his luck to give to you. And it's a land, Zobas, flowing, Cholov, with milk, Udvash, and honey. A land flowing with milk and honey. Eretz Aknani, Rashi. He only enumerates 5 of the 7 nations, called Zion, Goyim, Mishma. He means all 7. When we talk about the Canaanite nations, it incorporates all of them. One of them was called Canaani. So Canaan is one of the Canaanite nations. I often say it's like New York has 5 boroughs, and one of those 5 boroughs is New York. Abraham, that day God entered into covenant with Abraham. Who dwell in this land. So God entered into an oath with all the patriarchs to give them Israel. What kind of milk are we talking about? And what kind of honey are we talking about? One would think we're talking about cow's milk and bee honey, Subi honey. The answer is no. There's an abundance of goats. We're talking about goat's milk, which they say, what do I know? I'm from New Jersey. But they say is very healthy. And hadvash, zov minat morim, and the honey is the honey which flows from dates, or minatainim, and from figs. So aveda hazais, which service? Shall Pesach, the Paschal service. Like we already learned earlier, when you come to the land, why is it repeated? Because there's a new teaching here. Earlier it says, earlier, a few days ago, we learned the portion. What will be when your children say to you? That was on Thursday's portion. As we said then, it talks about the wicked son, where he removed himself from the entire general statement of the Jewish people. What does the Rosh say? You. What is the service for you? I don't want any part of it. But here we got to tell you shall tell your son, he's talking about the son who doesn't know how to ask. The Torah teaches you that this is the son who doesn't even know what to ask. You must open up the conversation with pleasant story-like teachings which draw his heart into Judaism. 6. Shivas Yomim Techel Matzos. For 7 days you shall eat matzah. So by Yom HaShvi on the 7th day, Chag is a major holiday. La Hashem, to God, that's Shvi, shall Pesach, the 7th day of Pesach. In the diaspora, the 7th and the 8th day. Matzah shall be eaten, Shivas Hayomim, for these 7 days. Not only should you eat matzah, but there shall not be seen in your possession any chametz, any non-matzah, meaning leavened bread, nor should you have any yeast in all of your boundaries and all of your property. For these 7 days, a Jew is not allowed to own any chametz. We learned earlier that's why it talks about and b'chol gvulecha, as our sages say, shelcha iatoroa. You cannot see your own chametz, but you may have concealed properly so you don't accidentally grab for it in your house the chametz that belongs to a non-Jew. Because only a Jew may not own chametz, which is the whole idea of selling the chametz before Pesach. This is where the word Haggadah comes from. You shall relate, you shall tell. Haggadah means to tell, to transmit, to teach. You shall tell your son by Yomahu on that day, Lamar, saying, this is why God did all that to me. When he brought me forth out of the land of Egypt. This meaning the Seder. Because I'm going to fulfill his commandments. For example, Pesach, Matzah, Mora, eating of the Paschal sacrifice, eating of the unleavened bread, eating of the bitter herbs, halolu, which we have at our Seder. That's what you should tell your son. Also Hashem li, God did for me. Romaz, here in this verse, the Torah alludes to tshuva, an answer, leben rosha, to the wicked son. Leimar, you're kind of telling the wicked son between the lines. Also Hashem li, God did this miracle for me, v'loi lecha, or v'loi loch, not for you. As we say in the Haggadah, she'ilu hayisa sham, had you been there, loi hayisa kedai ligo, you would have not been deservant. You would have not deserved, you would have not merited to be redeemed. You would have died with the many Jews who refused to leave and died. The Rebbe has many talks on this verse and on this concept, and the Rebbe poses a simple question. The Haggadah, the Seder, has 4 sons sitting at the Seder. One of the sons is the wicked son. We want the wicked son at the Seder. We cater to him. The 4 cups of wine are corresponding to the 4 sons. And the section of Haggadah, we say, in between them, is corresponding to the message to that son. The largest section of the Haggadah is between the first and second cup of wine. The vast majority of the Seder is dedicated to the wicked son. Are we telling the wicked son, come, sit down at my Seder, in order to hit him over the head and say, had you been there, you would have not come out? That's going to alienate him. So the Rebbe explains the opposite is true. What we tell him is that the Egyptian bondage took place before the Torah was given. Before the Torah was given, you wanted to come out, you came out. You don't want to come out, you don't come out. Had he been there, he would have not come out. But once the Torah is given, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Even a Jew who sins is a Jew. No Jew will be left behind. Lo yidach, mimenu nidach. No one will be cut off from the Jewish people. Mashiach will come, be'atem teluktu, le'echad echad, and will gather every Jew one by one and take him out of Golus. So this is the message to the Rosh. You should be happy. You live now and not then. Verse 9. And this entire message should also be La'is as a sign, al yodecha, upon your arm, referring to the tefillin. This is one of the 4 portions of tefillin. Ulizikaron, and as a memorial beinenecha, between your eyes. Laman, in order that Tiyah, there shall be Torah Hashem, the teaching of God, beficha, in your mouth. Kibiyot chazaka, that with a mighty hand. Hetziach Hashem, God brought you forth in Mitzrayim, from the land of Egypt. The Exodus from Egypt. Tiyah shall be to you. La'is as a sign, al yodcha, upon your hand. Ulizikaron, and as a memorial beinenecha, between your eyes. Meaning, shetichte ba'parshas halol, you shall inscribe, write these portions and place them in tefillin. Vs.16, you shall bind the tefillin baroish, on the head, or bazrayin, on the arm. Al yodcha, yad smel, your left arm. Tefillin is placed on the left arm, or the weaker arm of man. Lefikach yodcha mole b'parsha shniya. In the second portion, the word yodcha is spelled yud dalet chaf hey. Lidresh ba yad shehikeya, the weaker arm, of course, a left-handed person. If he writes with his left hand, puts tefillin on his weaker arm, which is his right arm. Balaturim here. There should be a balaturim here. Verse 9. It shall be to you for a sign upon your arm. Says the Balaturim, these 5 words have the numerical value of Zreya Smail, the left arm. Torah Hashem Beficha, those 3 words, the teaching of God in your mouth, has the numerical value of Zehu Kriyas Shema. This is the reading of the Shema. Hotziacha in this verse is missing a Yud because God brought you forth. Yud is 10. In the 10th plague, got the message through. Verse 10, Vishamarta, you shall guard and observe this ordinance, Lamayad, in its proper season, Miyamim Yamima, year to year. Every year you observe this holiday. Miyamim Yamima Rashi, Mishona Lishona, from year to year. The Balaturim here has an interesting teaching on verse 10. Limo Ada. The word Limo Ada seems to have a Yud, seems to have a Vav, which is unnecessary. We could do very well without that Vav. It's an extra Vav. Yes, it can work, but you don't need it. Vav has the numerical value of 6. And this alludes to the fact that how many days of an average week do we put on tefillin? 6 days, because on Shabbat we don't put on tefillin. Also, there are 6 festivals where there's no tefillin. And they are Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeres. And Martin Luther King Day, Caesar Chavez Day. What am I missing? Cinco de Mayo. Okay, these are some of the teachings in the Baal Haturim. Verse 11, let's not forget Cinco de Mayo in California. Muy importante. 11, V'hoyo, it shall come to pass. Now we're going to the 4th portion of tefillin, to another portion of tefillin. The portions of tefillin are Shema, V'haya im Shomoa, the first 2 portions of the Shema, Kadesh, the portion we just learned, and V'haya Kiviacha. That makes up the 4 portions of tefillin. V'haya shall come to pass Kiviacha, and God will bring you, El Eretz HaKanani, deliver you to the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to to your forefathers, and the son of Allah, and he will give it to you. Some of our sages learned from here that the firstborn born in the desert were not sanctified. And those who say they were, the Fars Beazu interpret this coming into Israel. If you fulfill it in the desert, you will merit to enter into the land, and you'll observe it there as well. Where? I shall bring you to the land, regarding which I lifted up my hand in oath. You should feel as if God gave it to you already that day. Don't feel it's just an inheritance from forefathers. Feel that God just gave you Israel. 12, and you shall cause to set apart. You shall set apart. Any animal that opens the womb to God. And every first that comes out of the animal of the males, you shall set aside Hashem. And this is actually called the korban, the sacrifice of the firstborn of the kosher animals. 12, it means to set apart, to designate. An abortion, which the mother animal expels and sends forth before its time. The Torah teaches you that if the animal aborts its firstborn, then that's it. You don't take the next animal. It exempts the next one. Even though the word nefel, an abortion is not sheger, this has a limited teaching. And if you'll argue and say, wait a minute, this verse includes all animals, even the impure, In another place, it limits it to cattle and sheep. There's another interpretation of the Torah speaks of the firstborn of a human being. The truth is that if a girl comes first, then the boy that follows that is not considered a firstborn. Or if the firstborn is stillborn, then the next child is not considered a firstborn, and so on. 13. The firstborn of every donkey, this is a special law, that the firstborn of every donkey has some level of sanctity as well. Not, God forbid, that you can offer it as a sacrifice, but you redeem it with a sheep, or there's a liberal interpretation which our sages give here. You can redeem many firstborn donkeys with one sheep. Take many donkeys and redeem them with one sheep. And give the sheep to the Kohen for his personal property. That sheep does not become a sacrifice. But if you refuse to redeem the donkey and say, leave me alone, it's my donkey, then the Torah says, you have to break the neck of the donkey. You cannot use the donkey because you refuse to keep God's commandment. And any firstborn amongst your sons shall also be redeemed. This is the pidyon haben, the redemption of the firstborn, where after the firstborn lost his privilege of the birthright, and it was given to the Kohen. Whenever we have a firstborn son, we have to give the Kohen 5 silver shekels, or dollars, or the shekel of any country you live in order to redeem your firstborn. The Kohen says, what do you prefer, your firstborn child or 5 silver shekels? And you say, let me think about it. Kid's been crying a lot. This law only applies with a donkey, not any other impure animal. It doesn't apply to a horse. This is a decree, because the verse compares the Egyptian firstborn. They had the morality of donkeys. 8, furthermore, they aided the Jewish people in their departure. There was not one Jew who didn't take many donkeys laden to the Mikasvam, with the silver and gold of the Egyptians. You shall redeem with a lamb. And he gives the lamb to the Kohen for his personal property. The redemption of a donkey, which is given to the Kohen. It's not a sacrifice. The Kohen could benefit from it. This sheep is everyday mundane property. The Kohen could do anything, the Levi, or the Kohen rather, could do anything he wants with it. The guy refuses, he has to break the neck of this donkey, and kills it. Why would we do that? Because this farmer, this Israelite, caused the Kohen to lose money. Let him lose his money. 25 silver shekels, stipulated in the book of Numbers, chapter 14. Now we come to this son who doesn't know how to ask. But what if your son will ultimately ask you, Mazos, what is this? This seems to be the Tom, the son who is simple and just says, what is this? You shall tell him, with a mighty hand, God brought us forth from Egypt, from a house of bondage. What does the verse teach us when it says tomorrow? Tomorrow. Sometimes tomorrow means mañana, tomorrow. Sometimes tomorrow means eventually, in the future. Like this one, it doesn't mean your son is going to ask you tomorrow, what's this? It means many years from now. Your children should not say tomorrow to our children. We're talking about what the members of Gad and Reuben in Transjordan will say, their children will say to the Israelites and vice versa. This is a foolish child who doesn't know the depth of his question. And it vaguely says, what is this? So in the beginning of the portion, earlier in this verse, I said this is the son who does not know how to ask. I correct myself. We already covered that. This is, as I said just earlier, the simple son. Elsewhere he says, the wise son says, what are these testimonial laws, statutes, ordinances? This one is the complex question of the wise son. The Torah addresses 4 different kinds of children. Rosha, the wicked son, which we covered earlier, who says, what is this to you and not me? V'sheni de Elisha, which we covered earlier, the son who doesn't know how to ask. You have to engage him in conversation, draw him in. V'ashel derech stuma, the one who just says, Mazos, what's this? Here in Los Angeles, he says, what's happening? V'ashel derech chochma, and then there's the wise son who asks wisely. 15, tell them that it came to pass when Pharaoh was hard on us and refused to let us go. And God slew. He killed all the firstborn in Egypt. From the firstborn of men to the firstborn of animals, and that worked. And Pharaoh let us go. It is therefore, for this reason, today I am offering to God any firstborn which opens the womb of the male, and all firstborn of my sons, I will make the pidyon haben, the redemption of the firstborn. Not to be confused, as I always say, with the pig in the den. 16, here again is the mention of tefillin, which is why this is the fourth portion of tefillin. This shall be a sign upon your arm. And here we see the spelling of yodcha, yadkeya, ula teitopes beinenecha, and teitopes, frontlets between your eyes, a sign between your eyes. Ki b'chezek yod, that by a strong arm, etzianu Hashem, God brought us forth from Mitzrayim, from the land of Egypt. Rashi, ula teitopes refers to the sign, frontlets of tefillin. Why would tefillin be called totopos? What a strange word. V'al-shem shehemar bobotim. I like to quote the great Theodor Bickel, the great entertainer Theodor Bickel, who talks about when he was approached by a Chabadnik to put on tefillin at a great public event. And he says, tefillin are a strange commandment. He says, you know what tefillin are? In English, they're phylacteries. He says, however, if you don't know what tefillin are, chances are you're not going to know what phylacteries are. At best, it sounds like a disease. Frontlets, phylacteries. Kruyin